Chapter 43. The fight in the room was already a mess, but outside the room, the captain and the secretary were still talking. Didn't you notice? As I said just now, this kid looks honest, but deep down, he doesn't trust people. No, it seems that he doesn't trust the authorities. The fat captain frowned. Could it be that this kid was bribed by someone when he was a recruit? Ha 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 ha. The secretary did not laugh, and the captain also stopped laughing. After coughing twice, he said, "Probably because he's been in Eastwood for too long. This kid's personality is just like the people of Eastwood. He's just a rock, too straight and stubborn. We need to soften his temper, soften it a little. We need to let him know that in this world, you won't have a bright future just because you keep pushing forward. You want to let him know that power comes first? That's poisoning the ambitious youth." The secretary shook his head disapprovingly. "No wonder you want those cadets to watch him. I'm afraid that young man is going to get a beating later. Even if you want to let him know the horrors of reality, there's no need to make him bleed. What if the miss asks, 'You said the commander is also interested in him. What if he hates our 4th military region? He's just a little brat. If he can't even bear this little bit of humiliation, what use is he? Besides, when did our military region ever get any less hate?" The captain said mockingly, "This little brat, making me worry for so long. Getting a beating is already a light punishment." "Right, that kid's called Sulg? Why does this name sound so familiar, like I've heard it somewhere before?" The fat captain yawned and turned to look at the room not far away. These days, he had cursed those Westwoods cadets to the point that they were worse than shit. Those proud young officers had long been harboring anger in their hearts. Being alone with Sulu for such a long time, the room must have been burning with dry wood for a long time. The captain thought to himself, that kid is probably already beaten into a pig's head. It's time to end all this. Otherwise, if those shit-eating juniors in the military academy really did not stop, and something bad happened to them, how would he explain it to the miss tomorrow? The captain pushed open the cabin door and walked in with his secretary. Then, the expression on his face suddenly froze. The sound of punches and kicks breaking through the air suddenly rang out in the room and then stopped abruptly. In the blink of an eye, 3 people had fallen beside Sulu. Pa, 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 pa. 2 steps forward, 1 hand in a seal and 1 hand in a cross. He neatly entered and knocked down 2 people again. Sulu crossed his legs and retreated to the side of the bed, vigilantly scanning the surroundings. After knocking down 5 people in the blink of an eye, he, who was already injured, was already feeling tired. Because he had used too much force, the corner of his lips was torn and blood flowed out again. He wiped it away with his sleeve and glared fiercely at those people in the room who had not rushed up in time. Watching as their hands slowly moved to their waists, he cursed in his heart. Are they still going to draw their guns when they can't win? While thinking this, Sulu crouched down and put his hands on his head. This was not a surrender, but just so that when he was beaten up later, he would not be too badly injured. After all, if he did not resist, these Westwoods cadets could not draw their guns and shoot him full of holes. As he crouched down, he calculated very seriously. He had knocked out 2 people, and it seemed that the joints of 2 people had been shaken off by his arm muscles. The young leader, who seemed to be the proudest, had been beaten up by him until his face was covered in blood. Calculating this, even if he was beaten up a few more times and knocked unconscious, he would still have profited no matter what. Just as Sulu was about to be beaten up with a trace of unwillingness, a trace of stubbornness, a trace of defiance, and a trace of seriousness, the cabin door opened. The fat captain looked at the mess in the room and the unconscious and painful NCOs. A trace of shock flashed across his face. When he saw that the NCOs who were still standing had already pulled out their guns, his face was so gloomy that it was somewhat frightening. He walked over and slapped the back of the head of one of the NCOs. He scolded sternly, "Shameless prodigal son of a bitch. Is this how your teachers teach you? Since when did the 4th military region have so many good-for-nothings like you?" A female cadet with a pretty face was startled and immediately explained, "The suspect injured people, Without waiting for her to finish, the captain coldly cut her off and slowly walked up to Sulu. Looking at this youth who was crouching on the floor with his head covered like an innocent white rabbit, countless questions arose in his heart. Who exactly was this youth? 18-year-old veterans were not rare, but to be able to knock down 5 outstanding officers in such a short period of time, this was too inconceivable. It should be known that although the Westwoods Military Academy was not the top military academy in the Federation, the outstanding officers there would still be the best candidates for the tip of the spear if they were placed in any army. Yet, this youth was actually able to take on 5 of them by himself? Taking a quick look at the injuries of those officers, the captain's brow furrowed. From the looks of the technique, it was indeed the style of military combat, but to be so ruthless, how could it be as harmless and down-to-earth as this brat appeared? Without warning, the fat captain kicked out at Sulu on the floor. In that instant, his fat body seemed to have been forged from steel. That thick leg carried a terrifying presence as it swept directly at Suli's upper body. Sulu had already given up at the muzzle of the gun, but he did not expect those officers to actually pull back their guns. Even more so, he did not expect that this captain who looked like he had trouble even walking would actually launch an attack at him without warning, and with such ferocity and terror at that. Sulu did not even think about it. The instinctive awareness he had developed from stiff dancing and butchering cows these past 4 years made him squint his eyes to prevent the strong wind from affecting his vision. Meanwhile, the 2 arms protecting his head also separated in the shortest amount of time. One arm extended forward, the other slightly behind, forming a 3-dimensional figure 8, blocking in front of that terrifyingly thick leg, suddenly transforming from a fat captain into a cold-faced, stout killing machine. The leg that suddenly arrived vibrated with a terrifying whistling sound. Carrying a shocking strength, it very easily broke through the arm that Sulu had barely blocked in front of him. With a speed that could not be seen clearly by the naked eye, it swept towards the last arm that Sulu had protected in front of his face. In a series of afterimages, apart from the captain and Sulu, no one else could have noticed that terrifyingly thick leg. After easily breaking through Suli's first arm, its speed had decreased slightly, but its strength was still terrifying to the extreme. His fingers touched the wind in the air and the texture of the fabric of the trousers. With his head lowered, Suli's knuckles turned white. With a shake of his wrist, he grabbed downwards, intending to grab the opponent's ankle and use his fingers to pinch into the tendons to make the opponent lose his strength. However, this was ultimately just an extravagant hope. The strength of the fat captain's terrifying leg was too great. In that instant, Sulu felt a numbing pain in his fingertips, which then dissipated. He could no longer hold on, and could only sorrowfully wait for the result of being swept by this thick leg. Instinct, as usual, had become an instinctive reaction from familiarity. At this most dangerous moment, he let that mysterious tremor emanate from every pair of intertwined muscle fibers of Suli's body, gathering into a powerful force that was transmitted to his arms, his fingers. However, at the same time, rationality, the mechanic Feng Yu most admired his calmness took effect. He gave up on the tremors in his body and released his strength, allowing the captain's thick leg to sweep over him. Knocking down these military academy students could still be said to be due to his amazing ability. If he had used his combat ability to block this terrifying leg, it could also be said that he had an excuse. However, Sulu did not dare to let outsiders discover that mysterious force in his body. As for what that tremor was all about, he did not know. However, he knew that if anyone with ulterior motives discovered that the tremor in his body had anything to do with Uncle Feng, then what awaited him would definitely be the Federation's all-out investigation. His disguise would definitely be exposed. In this lightning-fast exchange of blows, there was no room for any hesitation or giving up. Sulu swayed in that instant, and the captain's fierce and tyrannical leg sweep landed squarely on his chest. That tremendous force was not something he could block with just his 2 arms. After a muffled thud, Sulu fell heavily onto the bed. He grunted in pain, but a trace of doubt flashed through his eyes. The fat captain's leg was still maintained 30 degrees downward. It did not move at all, as if it was made of steel. It was so stable that it was frightening. His leg was not a full sweep. Otherwise, that powerful force would have been enough to kick Sulu until he vomited blood and fainted. After a moment of silence, the fat captain frowned. He slowly retracted his right leg and walked out of the room without looking back. That kid's skill is not bad, but it's a pity that he's not that kind of genius. The fat captain walked lazily in the corridor. There seemed to be some regret in his tone. This comment seemed to be very ordinary, but the secretary who had been following beside him was shocked. He knew very well that the captain he served looked like an ordinary fat man, but in reality, he was the strongest Special Forces soldier in the 4th Military Region. He was not a special mecha team member like Lake and the others. He was the real ace of the military region and was deeply trusted by the commander. Otherwise, the military region would not have handed over the ancient bell to him to manage, and would not have let the captain send the young miss to school on the capital planet without worry. For example, the secretary knew very well that the captain could have let this kick hit Su Li's chest and retreated after using 30% of his strength. If he had really used his full strength, that young man would definitely have his bones broken and his life lost. Such an unfathomable captain actually judged that kid's skill level to be not bad. It seemed that the 3 retired young men that the young miss bumped into when she disappeared this time were really powerful. Geniuses in the military are all trained. He has already retired, so it is not difficult for the military region to recruit him again. There are many examples in the past. The secretary gave an idea. The captain did not stop walking. He shook his head and said, "Although ordinary talents are precious, they can be found anywhere. Real geniuses are hard to find. Since that kid is not the good material that the commander is looking for, there is no point in keeping him." What kind of genius? The secretary did not understand. The kind from Old Lee's family. The captain smiled bitterly. The geniuses of the Federation who cultivate seem to be in his family. The secretary smiled and said, "Of course. His old man is that one." The next day, Sulu cleaned himself up and put on his white clothes. Under the guidance of the staff, he came to the upper floor of the antique bell. He didn't know what was waiting for him, but he reminded himself that the capital was not far away, so he should keep a low profile. Chapter 44. Sulu sat on one side of the long table in the restaurant's private room. He looked at the snow-white tablecloth that stretched out like a carpet in front of him and lowered his head slightly. He did not understand why the rich people of the Federation would be so wasteful when eating a meal. There was a glass of water in front of him. The food had not been served yet because the host who was treating him to the meal had not arrived yet. 2 waiters stood calmly to the side and waited. Sulu could not find anyone to talk to, nor was he interested in talking. He lowered his head, held a silver knife and fork, and gestured on the snow-white tablecloth. After a night, the pain on his body had healed a lot. He began to recall the fat captain's kick that came whistling over. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that kick was terrifying. He lay on the bed and thought for a long time. He realized that in that moment, even if he could allow his muscles to tremble and release the magical power in his body, he might not have been able to completely block that kick. Because of this kick, Sulu thought of 2 problems. The first problem was how to deal with the magical power in his body. Once he used all his strength, he could break the special military plastic handcuffs. This was not something an ordinary person could do. It was just that the trembling of his body was too obvious, and it was too easy for people to associate it with the mechanic uncle. Could he find a way to make this trembling only run in his body and not be seen through his appearance? The second problem was how to defend against a kick as fierce as the fat captain's. That kick was obviously a super powerful combat skill in the military. It swept directly at an angle of 30 degrees downward. It was clean and neat, and it carried a huge amount of power. It looked extremely simple, but whether it was the speed, the angle, or the estimated recovery, they were all calculated to the extreme without any loopholes. If he had been standing at that moment, he might have been able to close in and elbow the crotch. Even if his leg was broken, he would still be able to make the other party suffer some hidden losses. But the problem was that he was sitting. How could he deal with it when he was sitting? He held a shiny silver knife and fork and set them up on the snow-white tablecloth, simulating the other party's kick and his possible responses. The boss had taught him 10 stances, which were undoubtedly very powerful moves. Otherwise, he would not have been able to defeat 5 of the top students from the Westwoods Military Academy in one go. But these 10 postures were very fixed, and all of them were advanced techniques. Not a single step back was taken. Although it was extremely powerful, it was too stiff. It couldn't be helped. It was a stiff dance to begin with. Sulu scratched his head in distress, immersed in his thoughts about combat and unable to extricate himself. At first, he did not have much interest in the ability to fight. In his opinion, the Federation was no longer a battlefield for individual heroism. However, Uncle Feng had convinced him by saying that he was the #1 machine. After that, the thrilling experience of the past few days made him realize how important it was to grow individual strength. Most importantly, he was a person who liked to compete and study. He was like this when he was learning mechanics from Uncle Feng, and now he was like this when he was pondering about fighting. It was very easy for him to become engrossed in his studies without realizing it. Of course, this was an extremely rare learning potential. Only when you are obsessed with certain things can you practice these things well. Now I have a general understanding of how you were able to defeat those arrogant dog's hits. I think that these past 2 years of military service in the mines of Donglin, you were probably also posing in combat postures all the time. At some point, the fat captain had walked into the restaurant's private room and was looking at him with a strange expression. A few crisp sounds reverberated in the empty room. The silver knife and fork that had been placed together fell onto the table. Su Li's fingers, which had been gesturing non-stop, also froze in the air. He looked at the fat captain's blood-stained face and scratched his head with a smile. The other party seemed to have misunderstood something, but this was also good. Otherwise, he would not know how to explain what had happened yesterday. The fat captain walked to his side and sat down, letting out a satisfied sigh. It seemed that the lazy him hated walking. How could such a person send out such a fierce kick? Sulu certainly did not believe this appearance at this time, but he had a good impression of this fat captain, so he maintained a polite silence. There are many talented people buried in the army, and there are also many people like you who study fighting all day long. I saw the surveillance video yesterday. The combat skills you used were very strange. It was probably the result of simplifying military boxing. I don't know if it was good, but in any case, it was a little too strong and did not leave any room for retreat. The fat captain panted as he took the water in front of Sulu and drank it. He said, "With this kind of self-development method, you won't be able to learn anything deeper in the army. If you are interested in this, when the ship arrives at the capital, I can introduce you to a few of the more famous cultivation halls." Cultivation halls? Sulu did not know why the captain had suddenly removed the guards outside the room and formally invited him to eat in front of him. He wanted to remain cautious and silent, but when he heard this unfamiliar term, he could not help but ask curiously, "What is that place? Is there a place in the Federation that specializes in learning how to fight?" The fat captain looked at him as if he was looking at a fool. "Although you have been a mouse in Donglin for 2 years, you are still from Shanglin. How can you not know about cultivation halls?" Sulu knew that he had given himself away. He smiled and shook his head, not saying anything or explaining. From the fat captain's description, he knew what cultivation halls meant. In today's society, thermal weapons had been developed to the peak, and individual martial arts were relatively insignificant. The purpose of the martial arts halls in ancient times was no longer to teach combat skills, but to train one's mind with skills, to calm one's mind, and to cultivate one's body and mind. It was also for this reason that the people who trained in the cultivation hall were not very competitive and did not attract much attention. The cultivation classes in the military academy have long been changed to combat skills classes. Young people nowadays are too stupid. They don't know what is really good. The fat captain shook his head in disdain and said, "If the cultivation halls were really useless, why would the Li family require every generation of descendants to study in the cultivation halls from the age of 12 for 2 years before coming out?" The Li family? Sulu knew that as an orphan from Donglin, he was a country bumpkin in the eyes of most people, so he did not mind speaking his doubts frankly. "Are you talking about the Lees of Philadelphia?" The fat captain nodded. Sulu sucked in a breath of cold air. A glittering name suddenly appeared in his mind. A noble existence, a low-key but extremely famous family. This family was not in the Federation's traditional 7 families, but in the past few decades, because of that old man, they had gained the collective respect of the Federation citizens. I just want you to go and learn. What are you thinking about? Do you also expect to assassinate the emperor of an empire? The fat captain looked at the young man's expression and said sarcastically. Sulu chuckled and suddenly asked seriously, Mr. Captain, this is a misunderstanding. I think you're already clear about it. I don't know why you asked me to come here today. The fat captain put on a serious smile and said softly, Of course, I want to build a good relationship with you, young master. At the same time, I want to ask you to do me a small favor. Suddenly, the fat captain became so flattering and so natural. It really scared Sulu. He was stunned on the spot and did not know what to say. At this time, the cabin door slowly opened on both sides. Two women in suits walked in, holding hands. Under the protection of 7 or 8 service staff, a little girl wearing a pink floral dress and a sky-blue hair clip on her head walked in. She looked very cute. The fat captain lowered his voice and said fawningly, Little brother, this is what I want to ask of you. If you can let the little miss eat, then the things in the past can be discussed, and the things in the future can also be discussed. Sulu was speechless. He did not expect the captain's serious request to be this. However, when he saw the little watermelon's face change from gloomy to surprised, and saw the swaying black hair on the little girl's forehead, he could not help but laugh happily. He shouted over there, Little watermelon, Big brother Sulu. Little watermelon broke free from the hands of the two female staff. Under the helpless gazes of those people, she ran to Sulu and sat directly next to him. She opened her black eyes and asked curiously, Big brother, why are you here? I'm here to eat with you, Sulu said with a smile that in the next few days, Sulu got rid of his identity as a criminal suspect and moved from cleaning Area 38 to the upper level of the spaceship with more advanced facilities. He began to eat, play, and tell stories with Little Watermelon. He liked Little Watermelon very much. He did not think the little girl was as difficult as the captain said, so he did not think this job was difficult. But if Sulu knew that this was the prelude to the heavy responsibility he would have to bear in 2 years, would he still feel as happy as he did now? Or would he say that he wanted to do this internship better? That afternoon, Little Watermelon began to take an afternoon nap. Sulu opened the cabin door and prepared to go back to his room to study how the tremors in his body could be hidden under his skin. As he walked, he unexpectedly saw a few familiar faces at the corner of the corridor. The Westwoods Military Academy students who were knocked unconscious by him had been treated in the ship's medical room and recuperated for the past few days. They had basically all recovered. Colonel Lake's special mecha team was still heavily injured, so the protection of the upper level of the spaceship was still handed over to them. It was very strange. The two most powerful forces on the Ancient Bell were all injured because of the teacher-student pair of Feng Yu and Sulu. Sulu was slightly taken aback. He looked at the red and swollen temple of the officer named Wang Ming. After a moment of silence, he nodded his head and walked past him. He did not greet him, nor did he show any signs of hostility. Zhou Jin, who was standing beside the space porthole, looked at the back of that ordinary person and subconsciously touched his throat. He seemed to feel a faint pain. Chapter 45. Suli's back disappeared around the corner. The few Westwoods Military Academy officers who had been staring at him all this time retracted their gazes. Their expressions did not change, but perhaps they all breathed a sigh of relief in their hearts. At this time, they already knew that the young miss seemed to be very reliant on that youth. As soldiers of the Westwoods, they naturally could not take the initiative to provoke her. Moreover, it looked like that young man named Sulu was not a person who held grudges, but for some reason, they were still a little nervous and a little resentful. Officer Wang Ming rubbed his throbbing forehead and lowered his head to curse something. 5 of their group had been defeated by Sulu. This was the most embarrassing scene of the entire journey. Zhou Jin sighed. He clasped his hands behind his back by the window and said to his classmates, There's nothing to complain about. If you can't beat him, you can't beat him. There's no point in holding a grudge. Yes, after all, we are professional soldiers. We don't specialize in the study of combat skills. The female officer comforted everyone softly. What she said was not wrong. Although the military academies nowadays still put a lot of emphasis on the training of combat skills in the military, What really determined the quality of a soldier was still the consideration of overall quality. For example, the skills to operate all kinds of vehicles and even aircrafts, the control of all kinds of standard weapons. When it came to personal strength, so what if you were extremely strong? Don't forget, he's just a young soldier who retired. Zhou Jin turned his body slightly and looked at these students who regarded him as the leader. He could not help but sigh and shake his head. It's not just you guys. Including me, all the students from the West Woods are used to have their eyes on the top of their heads. Even the 3 major military academies of the Upper Woods don't look up to us. But who would have thought that with so many of us, we would actually be defeated by a young soldier who just retired? What a tragedy, Zhou Jin said self-deprecatingly with a quirk of his lips. The corner of the corridor fell silent. The female officer felt helpless and subconsciously kicked the wall with her military boots. Suddenly, Wang Ming put down his hand from rubbing his temples and said in a muffled voice, "That kid looks honest, but he's actually quite vicious. I don't believe that he's really good to the young miss." "Don't find excuses." Zhou Jin glared at him. "If you want revenge, then you want revenge." "I just want to get my face back," Wang Ming angrily said. "I don't believe that I can't beat a little brat." "No, we're going to Upper Forest tomorrow. I'm going to look for him tonight. Don't worry, this is purely a competition. Don't mess around." Zhou Jin's expression darkened slightly as he reprimanded, "Last time, you were able to make a move in the room because of the captain's tacit approval. Now, in this situation, what's the point of competing? Don't cause trouble on the ship. If you do, I won't take care of you if your credits are deducted." "Then this matter is over? There's a big bump on my head. Your face is covered in blood, and Hai Lin is still wearing bandages. I won't do it. We have to do it even if we don't want to." Zhou Jin's voice was very hoarse. He subconsciously touched his throat again. When he thought of the arm that had hit his throat like a piece of metal, he felt a chill in his heart. Train yourself. Don't humiliate yourself. When you have the confidence, you can go and find him. Don't worry, I think you'll have many chances to meet him in the future. Wang Ming asked, "I heard that kid is from Upper Forest. The Ministry of Defense arranged for him to hitch a ride. Where can I find him in the future?" "I don't think so. The military is in need of talents right now. The military won't let go of such an inconspicuous but powerful person like him." Zhou Jin's judgment was not wrong. Although the fat captain had told his secretary that Su Lu was not the kind of genius he was curious about, the combat ability Su Lu had displayed, especially the mecha fragments all over the ground, had still made the captain extend an invitation to him. In a private setting, the secretary took out 3 documents and showed them to Su Lu. One was a special admission document for the Westwoods Military Academy, one was a secondary recruitment document that did not go through the Ministry of Defense, and the last was a job application document from a company in the capital ring. Su Lu flipped through the 3 documents with some confusion. Only then did he understand what the captain meant. Regardless of whether it was the Westwoods Military Academy or the secondary recruitment, for a newly discharged soldier, it was definitely a great opportunity that fell from the sky. The company in the capital ring was also very generous. The company that mainly built aircraft engines could provide Su Lu with good food, lodging, and salary. Think about it. The secretary looked at Su Lu with some happiness. Like the young lady, he could also see the honesty in this young man's bones. He really hoped that the young man would join his side. Although his current strength was very average, and his talent in mechanics still needed to be confirmed, a rock with potential would always attract more attention. Su Lu looked through the documents carefully and sighed regretfully in his heart. If it had been him in the past, no matter which condition it was, he would have gladly accepted it because he could leave Eastwoods and do what he liked. Wasn't this the reason why he took the NCO exam in the Ministry of Defense? But now he had to reject it because he was a fugitive. A fugitive who had to deceive the entire Federation. He did not want to have too much to do with the government. Uncle Boss once said that the most dangerous place was also the safest place. This sentence could only be believed 3 times. Su Lu wanted to use up these 3 chances easily. Moreover, regarding the Westwoods Military Region, or the 4th Military Region, Su Lu still had a strong resistance in his heart. The 4th Military Region was probably related to the boss death, although it was definitely an order from the Federation, and the 4th military region was only an executor, Sulu still could not get along with these people. If it was not for Little Watermelon, perhaps he would not even want to talk to these people. Sorry, I don't want to return to the army, and the Ministry of Defense seems to have arranged a reception unit for me. Sulu shook his head apologetically. He could see that the secretary in front of him was really thinking about him. The secretary shook his head regretfully, but he was not too disappointed. After all, he did try his best and also tried to repay the other party on behalf of the young miss. It was just that the other party did not want to accept for some unknown reason. The quiet and long journey in space ended. A heavy roar sounded in the huge commercial spaceship Ancient Bell. The powerful force was helping the huge spaceship to adjust its attitude and direction. Sulu, who had already packed his luggage and carried a backpack, looked at the light blue planet outside the porthole with eyes full of excitement. The planet was very beautiful. It had a light blue sea, light brown land, and white clouds floating on it. Outside the porthole, 2 small, streamlined blue spaceships were leaving the Ancient Bell's hull and heading towards the white clouds. It was really a heartwarming scene. This was the capital ring, also known as the administrative planet of the Upper Forest region, the center of the entire Federation civilization. The White President's office, the Gray Management Committee's conference building, and the legendary Bureau of Proclamation were all symbols of power that could control the entire Federation. All of these symbols of power were on this beautiful planet. Sulu followed the prompts of the electronic voice and suppressed his excitement. With the help of the staff, he entered the separation cabin. Since he rejected the secretary's suggestion yesterday, he had not seen anyone from the West Woods, not even Little Watermelon. Although it was a little regretful, he knew that with his identity as the Federation's top fugitive, he could only keep a distance from Little Watermelon, who obviously had a noble background. The land-to-air transfer spaceship unfolded its alloy wings at an altitude of 8,000 meters and turned into a bird in the blue sky and white clouds. It maintained absolute stability and flew towards the surface of the planet. The spaceship flew lower and lower. Finally, it skimmed over the edge of the white clouds and plunged into the thick, almost solid clouds. Sulu, who had a slight fear of flying, had seen enough of the scenery outside the window and the flame-like ion current. He closed his eyes tightly and waited for the moment of landing. The waiting time seemed to be a little long, so long that he almost fell asleep. He only felt a slight vibration when he opened his eyes. Like the other passengers beside him, he heaved a sigh of relief at the same time. He looked at the flat runway outside the window and the black and white electronic command tower not far away and laughed. Walking out of the cabin door, a gust of cold wind hit him in the face. Sulu looked at the ground in front of him and the buildings in the distance. His expression froze and he almost could not move his legs. These white, soft, and cold things, are they the legendary snow? He walked down the gangway under the urging of the passengers behind him, but the more he walked, the stiffer he became. It looked like he was practicing martial arts in a mine. The weather in Upper Forest was too cold. He was so cold that he wanted to stomp his feet, but he did not want to attract the attention of the people in the airport. In fact, it was impossible for him not to attract people's attention. In this area, everyone was wearing slightly thick thermal clothing, hats, and gloves. He was the only one who was still wearing the thin clothes of early autumn and carrying a broken backpack. He looked very pitiful. Sulu breathed into his slightly red hands. He was completely frozen. When he left Eastern Forest, it was also winter. However, the 4 seasons in Eastern Forest were not very different. It had not snowed for thousands of years. He did not expect the winter in the capital ring to be so cold. A snowflake drifted down and landed on his face, making him shiver. He wondered if he had made a big mistake by coming to the capital. This was the first time Sulu had seen snow in his life, but he could not feel the purity of the snow. He could only feel the coldness of the snow. This was all because he was not prepared. It was a tragedy. Chapter 46. Sulu squinted his eyes and looked at the snowflakes falling from the sky. He thought that these fluttering ice crystals were quite beautiful. This was the first time he had seen real snow. In his surprise, he seemed to have forgotten the thin clothes he was wearing. He also did not notice the sympathetic gazes of the passengers around him. Standing in the middle of the snowstorm in the square with only a thin layer of clothing, he did look quite pitiful. The passengers thought that Sulu had mistakenly put his thick clothing in his luggage and could not help but shake their heads. However, sympathy was one thing. They did not have many clothes on them, so no one would take off their clothes and put them on Sulu. In the capital city, the wind was getting stronger and stronger. Suli's face felt like it was being scraped by a few small knives. He immediately woke up from the snowy scene in front of him and felt the cold on his body. He shrunk his body and hugged his backpack in reverse to get some warmth. He turned his body and avoided the wind. He squinted his eyes and looked at the entrance of the airport in the distance. He wondered why the spaceship did not fly directly to the entrance of the airport, but stopped in the middle of the snowstorm. The ancient bell was still in space outside the capital planet. The officials of the West Woods and the East Woods who were returning to visit would soon embark on their journey again. At this time, those who landed on the surface of the capital planet were basically officials with official duties. Sulu did not have much knowledge, but the passengers on the ancient bell were all upper-class people. They began to discuss the current strange situation. The medical vehicles from the army hospital just left. Are there wounded people on board? Why haven't I heard of this before? Didn't we come from the East Woods? What's going on? A middle-aged official frowned and asked his companion. Behind him, Sulu heard this and squinted his eyes even more. He hid behind the crowd and looked through the gaps in the crowd. He saw a few ambulances covered in snow disappear into the distance of the airport. He vaguely thought that those on board must be the Westwood soldiers who had captured him. Those soldiers were affected by the strange beam of light and had been recuperating on the ancient bell. It seemed that the 4th Military Region did not dare to take the risk of sending them back to the Westwoods for treatment. Instead, they were sent directly to the capital planet where the medical standards were the most advanced. Thinking of that sunglasses-wearing Colonel Lake in the ambulance, and thinking of how he had been so close to that colonel and those injured mecha warriors for so many days, Sulu suddenly felt a trace of fear in his heart. That Colonel Lake had seen his face before. If the two of them had really met on the spaceship, what would he have done? In the cold weather, Suli's back was dripping with sweat. He knew that he was too careless. Fortunately, he probably would not have any relationship with the people from the West Woods in the future. Once he entered the capital planet, the fat captain and the secretary would not be able to find him easily. But little Watermelon, well, they were not on the same level to begin with. It might be better if they did not meet again. Just as Sulu was thinking about all these things, the electric vehicles of the airport finally arrived in front of many passengers. Of course, the airport was greeted with loud complaints and threats of complaints. However, the airport staff only apologized politely, but they refused to explain what had happened earlier. The ambulances are there to save people. We can understand that. Why could those passengers be driven directly to the passage? Why could they be in front of us? The airport staff only smiled and comforted them. Sulu looked in the direction the passengers were pointing at. He saw a silver-white aircraft slowly parking in front of the special passage in the distance. He narrowed his eyes and seemed to see a little girl holding a doll getting off the spaceship under the protection of many people and entering the passage. Sulu smiled and whispered to himself, "Little Watermelon, you have to eat properly in the future." It was as warm as spring in the electric vehicle. The complaining officials and passengers finally stopped. The long-term space travel had made everyone a little tired. The carriage fell into silence. This silence was maintained until they passed through the X-ray inspection passage and entered the interior of the airport building. The crowd dispersed like birds and beasts. According to each other's following journey and the location of their luggage, they scattered into several routes and disappeared into the magnificent space of the building. Sulu was obviously stunned by the interior structure and architectural style of the airport. He didn't know what the beautiful metallic materials were, but he subconsciously thought it was beautiful. This airport was too big. The interior space was 10 stories high. There were no steel beams in the middle to support the weight. He didn't know how it was built. He had basically lived in the rundown city of Hushi State all his life. He had never seen such a scene. Even when he passed by the military airport in the garrison area of Fuji State, the military airport looked like nothing more than cold cement. Sulu patted off the snow on his body and carefully carried his backpack. He was like a country bumpkin who had just entered the city. No, he was a country bumpkin who had just entered the city. He hesitantly and shyly walked in front of a flight attendant. He mustered up his courage and asked about the relevant matters. The flight attendant in the sky blue uniform had a pretty face. She was very polite and patient, and she clearly answered all of his complicated questions. Sulu thanked her very sincerely and found a quieter passage to leave. The flight attendant looked at the young man and couldn't help but smile slightly. She felt that this foreigner was very interesting. It looked like it was his first time on a spaceship, but his questions were so detailed and didn't miss any details. Perhaps he had looked up a lot of travel information on the internet before coming, looking at the passage in front of him that was completely made of metal. Sulu's footsteps slowed down. He felt his scalp go numb. At this time, he already knew that the back of this 5-meter-long passage was hidden with the Federation's electronic surveillance system. Every passenger had to go through a scan here. This was a very normal thing. Otherwise, wouldn't those people from the Empire or refugees from Bermuda who were born without microchips be able to sneak into the Federation at any time? Sulu swallowed a mouthful of saliva. His head was slightly lowered, but his eyes were looking at the exit not far away. He knew that the surveillance here was the most powerful in the Federation. If he could pass through here, then it meant that the microchip given to him by his boss was enough to allow him to survive in the entire Federation society with a disguised identity. But what if he was discovered by the Federation's surveillance system when he walked through the passage? Would there be 20 or so taser guns sticking out from the wall and roasting him into a roasted chicken? Sulu couldn't help but shiver. This scene fell into the crowd in the distance and felt a little strange. This was because no one in the Federation seemed to care about this surveillance passage. More often than not, people seem to have forgotten the existence of electronic surveillance. Looks like this kid was really frozen just now. Prepare a windbreaker for him, said a pleasant voice. Sulu's footsteps slowed down for only a moment. After a moment, he raised his head and walked as calmly as possible toward the empty passage. Only the change in his trouser pocket could feel his nervousness and trembling, but there wasn't a trace of it on his face. A distance of 5 meters wasn't long, but it wasn't short either. However, when Sulu calmly walked through this passage, his legs felt a little weak. He felt a kind of joy as if he had walked from hell to heaven, as well as a kind of joyful release after nervousness. However, his relaxed ecstasy didn't last long. This was because he realized that the people outside the passage were looking at him with a strange gaze. Sulu frowned slightly. He thought to himself that even the electronic surveillance system didn't find anything wrong. Could it be that there was something strange about him? He subconsciously touched his face and continued to walk forward. Then he realized why so many people were welcoming him with strange gazes. It was because outside this quiet passage, there was a large group of people welcoming him. Except for the young woman at the front and the little girl in the young woman's hand. This group of people were all fully armed soldiers. Such a large formation was used to welcome one person, especially a young man in a thin shirt who shrunk like a country bumpkin. It was no wonder that the people in the airport were looking at him strangely. Looking at the little girl's happy face, Sulu knew that he couldn't avoid this. He couldn't slip away quietly. With a bitter face, he walked to the front of the crowd, hoping that there wouldn't be any too horrible developments. Brother Sulu. Little Watermelon was wearing a red fur coat and a hat. The brim of the hat pressed down on her hair, revealing a black line. She looked very cute. Sulu smiled at her, then turned to the young woman holding the little girl's hand and said politely, "Hello? Hello, Sulu." The young woman was about 30 years old. Her eyebrows were soft, and she had a comforting beauty. But from time to time, her eyes lit up with a hint of pride. This kind of pride wasn't repulsive. Instead, it made people feel that it was natural. The so-called environment of growth affected one's mentality was probably referring to this kind of person. She looked at Sulu gently and said, "I am Fireworks' mother. Thank you very much, Mr. Su, for taking care of her along the way." Sulu looked at the beautiful and gentle face, and his mind was slightly shaken. He subconsciously felt that this young woman was very trustworthy. He forcibly suppressed the absurd idea of asking her why she gave Little Watermelon such a strange name and prepared to say a few polite words. Unexpectedly, The noble young woman handed over a business card with a smile and said, "I'm here to express my gratitude. I have to go to the army hospital right away. I'm very sorry. Mr. Su, if you have any difficulties in the Federation, I hope you don't mind contacting us. We also want to express our gratitude to you." "Thank you, sister." Su Lu looked into the young woman's eyes and blurted out an extremely absurd name. "Thank you, sister." This name made the faces of the soldiers and the crowd change dramatically. Even the gentle and peaceful young woman had a strange look in her eyes, but then it turned into a sympathetic smile. She shook her head and asked a soldier next to her to hand her a military windbreaker. Without saying anything, she held little Watermelon's hand and walked to the VIP passage under the protection of the soldiers. Sulu held the windbreaker in one hand and the natural fiber business card in the other. He was in a daze. Although he didn't know the goods, he knew how expensive this kind of business card was. He looked at the back of the young woman who was faintly discernible among the soldiers and couldn't help but shake his head with a wry smile. He also felt that he had been too nervous before. The boss was right. Too little contact with the opposite sex was indeed easy to cause problems. At this time, he had vaguely guessed little Watermelon's family background. Of course, he didn't think it was rude for the young woman to hand over a business card and then turn around and leave. In fact, Sulu didn't think that what he had done was worth the other party thanking him. With the other party's identity, it was already very polite of her to wait here and say a few words to him. What's more, he knew that this young woman must be anxious to go to the army hospital to see her husband's trusted subordinates. Unlike the self-confident and self-reliant male protagonists in novels, Sulu didn't tear up this precious business card and throw it into the trash can. Instead, he carefully kept it close to his body. Then he took out the address left by the boss, put on a warm windbreaker, and walked out of the airport in the increasingly heavy snow. Chapter 47. A low-key but expensive black car, like a black ghost, silently walked on the highway in the suburbs of the capital district. A few days of low temperature and snowy weather had accumulated a thick layer of snow on the flat road. Even the slightly heated pipes at the bottom of the asphalt couldn't make the snow melt faster. "Why did you come down?" The young woman in the back of the black car lovingly hugged the little girl who was looking out of the window in a daze. She looked at the fat captain opposite her and said with a smile, "A captain who doesn't stay on his own ship, aren't you afraid of being chased away?" The young woman's smile was gentle and charming, which didn't match her age. The atmosphere in the car suddenly improved a lot. The fat captain looked at the young woman and said with a flattering smile, "Little sister-in-law, such a big thing happened to the miss. Of course I have to come personally to apologize to you. The spaceship needs to be replenished anyway. I don't care." "Are you apologizing to me, or do you want me to plead with him?" The young woman looked at him with interest and asked. The fat captain said with a bitter face, "The miss has been missing under my nose for so long. After returning to the military, the boss will definitely drill me. Little sister-in-law, you must help me say a few words." "Isn't Fireworks fine? Why would he blame you? We all know how mischievous Fireworks is. This time, Brother Tion brought her here. It's already troublesome for you." The young woman smiled gently, looked at the daughter in her arms, and said softly, "Fireworks, don't run around in the future. You are an obedient child. Don't you know how anxious Uncle Zhang will be?" Zhong Fireworks stubbornly looked at the silent cedar trees outside the window and refused to answer her mother's question. She thought in her heart, except for Brother Sulu. No one in this world is willing to believe what she says. Even her father and mother are like this. They always don't listen to her opinion and always think that she is a child. They didn't ask for her opinion and wanted to send her to this cold and snowy place to study. As if guessing what the child was thinking, a trace of sadness and regret flashed across the young woman's face. She turned her head and said to the fat captain, "This child just doesn't want to leave home. It seems that I have no choice but to stay here with her for a few more years." The fat captain, surnamed Tion, immediately understood the underlying meaning of this sentence. He smiled and said, "Don't worry, little sister-in-law. I'll keep a close eye on the boss." In the blink of an eye, his expression became heavy. He said, "The commander has asked us to seal off the news of Mrs. disappearance. I've also told that child called Sulu, so he shouldn't have leaked the news. I just don't understand. If Miss isn't sent to the capital, could it be that those old members of the management committee dare to do anything? The young woman laughed. The Federation isn't the Empire, so there's no such thing as a hostage. It's just that our Zhong family has been stationed in the West Woods for too long, and the people in the capital are always worried. Sending fireworks back to the Federation to study isn't necessarily a bad idea. They probably want the descendants of the Zhong family to have a greater sense of belonging to the Federation from a young age. After saying this, she suddenly frowned slightly and asked, "Does that little guy called Sulu know fireworks' identity? That kid looks honest and reliable, but he's actually very shrewd. I'm afraid he's already guessed it, but he didn't say it out loud. He probably also knows that some things are better to pretend not to know." The fat captain shrugged his shoulders, and the fat on his body began to tremble again. Little Watermelon, who had been staring out the window, suddenly turned his head and looked at the two adults in the car. With all his strength, he said loudly, "Big Brother Sulu is a good person." The young woman laughed and said, "Of course he's a good person. He obviously knows that we're from the Zhong family, but he didn't ask for anything just because you like him. Instead, he hid far away. The key is that he hid very cutely, not that kind of hypocritical pretentiousness. Fireworks, Mother believes in your judgment of people." Little Watermelon proudly turned his head away. The young woman looked at the fat captain and said calmly, "Since that little guy doesn't want to have anything to do with us, then forget it. I've left him a military district office card. If he needs it in the future, we can help him." The fat captain nodded and then said, "The company's energy quota was reduced by half in one shot. I've already sent the report. The key is the management committee's energy committee. The other ministries should be easy to run to, but the energy committee needs to be personally talked to by the chairman." The fat captain had changed the way he addressed her. When it came to business, the young woman's expression became slightly more serious, but her tone was still gentle. "Leave this matter to me. But you really wasted so much of the quota in one shot." As a result, the Donglin Garrison District reimbursed an entire formation of Special Forces soldiers. There will be a lawsuit, and even Lake and the others were injured by you. When you return to the military district, you'll have to answer to them yourself." The fat captain's expression was unchanged, and he calmly replied, "The commander shouldn't make things difficult for me in this regard. That traitorous mechanic is a big enemy of the 4th Military District." After hearing this news, his mood will definitely be much better. The young woman's eyebrows slightly furrowed, and she curiously asked, "But the problem is that mechanic really so powerful? Even the Special Forces team led by Lake couldn't deal with it. So why did they have to do it from space? Next month, we must ask the Department of Defense to come forward and take over the ancient bell. Otherwise, we can't explain this problem. That mechanic is very powerful." The fat captain closed his eyes and recalled the strange jump of the black mecha on the thermal imaging device and satellite images that day. After a moment of silence, he opened his eyes and said, "He's much stronger than me. Lake and the others are no match for him at all. The Federation's mission this time is not easy to take over. No wonder the Department of Defense gave this credit to us." The young woman's expression became serious, and she asked, "How is he compared to him?" The fat captain knew that the him the chairman was referring to was the head, the commander of the 4th Military District. After thinking for a while, he objectively replied, "If it was a field battle, and they both used mechas, the head wouldn't be his opponent. But don't worry, the chairman, that guy can't be any more dead. More than 10 years ago, more than 10,000 lives in the military district were finally recovered." The young woman nodded, looked at the wind and snow outside the window, and lowered her head to look at her daughter who was sleeping soundly. Suddenly, she softly said, How strong is that mechanic? Other people definitely wouldn't understand, but I spent some time in the Lee family's training hall when I was young." The fat man lowered his voice and said very seriously, "I always felt that the mechanic was related to the Lees of Philadelphia." Hearing the Lees of Philadelphia, the young woman couldn't help but be a little moved. She knew that Fatty Tion was a rare expert in the 4th Military District, and his judgment was especially sharp, so the conclusion he came up with should be somewhat credible. After thinking for a moment, she softly said, "Since Mechanic Yufeng is already dead, This matter ends here. Don't tell the commander either. The Lee family definitely wouldn't betray the Federation. If those politicians find out, there will definitely be some commotion. As soldiers, of course we can't let Old Lee get into trouble. As a soldier, the fat captain also had incomparable respect for that old man surnamed Lee in his heart, so he nodded seriously in agreement. The 7 great families of the Federation were a privileged class with no special privileges. Countless years of history and countless great achievements made these 7 families become the pillars of the Federation. In a modern society where the laws of the Federation were the cornerstone, these somewhat ancient families only quietly lurked in the shadows, rarely showing their true identities for the general public to see. The citizens of the Federation all knew about the 7 great families, but they would never know why the 7 great families were so strong, or what kind of power and influence they had. With the status and position of the 7 great families, it was naturally impossible for them to bully an ordinary citizen of the Federation. It was even possible that there would never be any relationship between the two. For ordinary citizens, the 7 great families were like distant existences above the clouds. They existed in the idle conversations after a meal, in the illegally sold literature and publications, but they would never exist in their own lives. 6 of the 7 great families lived on the 3 administrative planets of the capital ring, and the only one not in the upper forest area was the Zhong family of the West Woods. There was only one Zhong family in the West Woods. Compared to the other families, the Zhong family was more transparent in the eyes of the people because since the founding of the Federation countless years ago, the Zhong family's 4th military district had taken on the responsibility of guarding the border of the Federation. Other than that accident in the Eastwood area, the 4th military district had never let down the expectations of the Federation people. Sulu finished buttoning up his windbreaker and stood in the wind and snow, waiting for the bus to arrive. From time to time, he would raise his head to look at the snowy sky, feeling rather baffled. He was just a fugitive. Who would have thought that he would actually be able to meet a legendary figure of the Zhong family, and even spend so many days with the young lady of the Zhong family? Moreover, he even saw the madam of the Zhong family at the airport. That was the wife of the commander of the 4th military district. It turned out that there was nothing strange about the legendary figure after all, and she actually looked quite gentle. At this time, Sulu did not know that Little Watermelon's mother was not only the wife of the commander of the 4th military district, but also the chairman of a large company. Otherwise, he would have been even more shocked. Squinting his eyes at the snow falling from the sky, the young man's heart had long since calmed down. He only felt slightly regretful. That broken M02 would probably continue to drift in space until one day it would be thrown into the endless void and become trash. After mourning for the first time, he had intimate contact with a broken mecha. The first time he had personally repaired it, Sulu looked at the time of the bus. After thinking for a while, he turned back to the airport and bought a pack of Shang Lin's specialty dog biscuits. A happy smile instantly appeared on his face. Back when he was in Eastwood, he already knew about Shang Lin's dog biscuits. He had seen the advertisements on Channel 23 quite a few times, but had never had the chance to try them for himself. After all, the 2 administrative districts were too far apart, and not all commercial companies were willing to do such a low-margin business like selling biscuits. The dog biscuits were very crispy, and Sulu ate them happily. He thought to himself, I really am a country bumpkin. In fact, everything in the airport was very expensive, but he did not care about that. Throughout the journey, he had been using his credit card to pay for everything. He had been using the Sanlin United Bank card that the boss uncle had left for him. He did not know how much money was in the card, but it seemed like there was no end to it no matter how much he swiped. When the bus arrived, Sulu followed a large leather suitcase onto the bus. After finding a seat with much difficulty, he took off his windbreaker and sat down. He placed the entire bag of dog biscuits on the food rack beside him and was about to slowly and happily eat them for the rest of the journey. Suddenly, his fingers brushed against 2 cold, slender fingers, giving him a fright. Sulu turned his head in shock and saw a girl wearing a hat reaching into the bag, unceremoniously preparing to take the biscuits. Chapter 48. The puppy biscuit was very crispy, and no matter how much one chewed it, it would still make a crunching sound. The puppy biscuit was very fragrant, and the two of them were surrounded by that kind of alluring grain fragrance. Sulu stared at the girl beside him, dumbfounded. He felt that this scene was too ridiculous. Why was this girl eating his biscuit, and eating it so naturally? Subconsciously, when the girl's fingers left the biscuit bag, Sulu quickly reached in to take a biscuit and put it in his mouth, as if he was afraid that he would be taken advantage of. The girl lowered her head and was concentrating on reading a magazine. Only the occasional flickering of her eyes let Sulu know that the other party was actually also paying attention to him. The dark green hat covered most of the girl's face, only revealing her delicate lips and fair skin. Sulu was stunned and felt that his gaze might make the other party feel awkward, so he turned his head away. In the wind and snow, the warm and spring bus started moving. What surprised Sulu was that the girl actually reached into the biscuit bag and started taking biscuits, one after another. Sulu liked to eat puppy biscuits, and this was the first time he ate puppy biscuits, so he cherished them. Although he didn't think much of a bag of biscuits, he always felt that even if you wanted to eat my biscuits, shouldn't you tell the owner first? Ask for my permission first? It was hard to avoid a trace of anger in his heart. It was obvious that the girl didn't have this kind of self-awareness. She didn't even look at Sulu, and just quickly and openly stole the biscuits, chewing them loudly without any trace of politeness. Sulu was dumbfounded, and quickly reached out to take the biscuits. Otherwise, if this girl snatched them away, what else could he eat? Wouldn't that be a huge loss? Therefore, as the bus moved on the road, the young man and woman sitting at the back of the bus didn't look at each other. One was looking out the window, the other was looking down at the magazine on his lap. They took the biscuits one by one, and no one was willing to take one less, and no one was willing to be slow for a second. Their hands were like the wind, and they took the biscuits one after another. It looked like they had a tacit understanding, but who knew that there was actually an endless amount of hidden killing intent? This is really strange. If she didn't meet me, this hateful biscuit-stealing thief would definitely be severely scolded. Looking at the snowy scenery outside the window, Sulu, who was chewing the biscuit, rolled his eyes. As time passed by, the anger in his heart had long disappeared. He was originally a broad-minded person, and it was impossible for him to care about such trivial matters. Instead, he secretly smiled and thought to himself that it was rare to meet someone who loved the dog biscuits as much as he did. Today's bag of biscuits would be considered as sharing. Sulu was a stingy person, and sharing anything good with others was something he was willing to do. Although the behavior of the long-haired girl wearing a hat was a bit ridiculous, he didn't plan to argue with her. He just felt that the situation was a bit awkward, or rather, he was worried that the girl would feel awkward, so he didn't speak to her. He even paid close attention to her, and didn't look in her direction. The bus slowly moved on the snowy road, and went around the highway outside the suburbs, heading towards the ordinary airport northwest of the capital. A cedar tree that stretched to the inner side of the road brushed against the window of the bus, and the sound it made woke up the sleepy people on the bus. The girl beside Sulu raised her head, revealing a beautiful face. The two people's eyes met, and Sulu gently smiled. Who knew that the girl's pure eyes flashed with a trace of disgust, and she immediately lowered her head to read the magazine again. A moment later, she seemed to feel that this wasn't enough to express her unapproachable attitude. So she took out a pair of black-framed glasses from her purse and put them on the bridge of her nose, blocking Sulu's strange gaze. The girl with her head down was wearing black-rimmed glasses. She looked really pure, especially from Sulu's angle. He scratched his head and thought to himself, such a pure girl secretly ate my biscuits, so why is she so fierce to me? After all, he was a youth from a remote area, and when facing the opposite sex, he was always a bit reserved. He just sighed in his heart and didn't say anything. Every time the girl with black-framed glasses took a biscuit, Sulu also took a biscuit, no more and no less. He smiled and ate happily. Although he was a very kind person, he didn't want to lose out too much. Just like that, there was only one biscuit left in the bag. According to the silent order from before, it should be Sulu's turn to take a biscuit. Sulu clearly noticed that the girl's pretty nose under the black-framed glasses wrinkled cutely, as if she was worried about something. Sulu silently grinned and took out the last biscuit from the bag. After thinking for a while, he broke it in half and with a kind smile on his face, he cautiously handed one half to the girl. The girl looked up, somewhat surprised and somewhat angry. Like a kitten fighting for food, she snatched the biscuit and swallowed it, but almost choked. Sulu chewed the last half of the biscuit while looking at her in a daze, thinking, "What's the hurry? Is she that hungry?" He wanted to pass his water to her to drink, but he was worried that this eccentric girl would dislike him. Fortunately, the sound of brakes broke this puppet-like performance. He didn't even say thank you. What a shameless scum. Zhang Xiaoming dragged her heavy luggage, lowered her head, and walked toward the airport counter. She had been on a spaceship for 7 days from District S2, and now she had to immediately transfer to the university town. The tiredness of the journey was already a little unbearable, and her heart was constantly weighed down by that heavy stone. Unfortunately, on the bus, she met an extremely untactful, repulsive, and shameful young man. He looks quite pleasing to the eye, and his smile is as sincere as a pig's. Who knew that underneath his bones, he was an ungrateful villain. He ate my biscuit like it was charity. Small Eyes, you really are not good people. Zhang Xiaoming put her heavy luggage on the conveyor belt and couldn't help but complain in a low voice. Entering the departure lounge, Zhang Xiaoming took off her black-rimmed glasses and carefully wiped them, as if she wanted to use this action to vent her anger. She never thought that there would be such a man in the world who would so blatantly eat her favorite dog biscuit since she was a child. Her destination was the university town. The university town was located in the northern latitudes of administrative planet S, one of the capital ring. The flight would arrive in half an hour. She noticed the crowd around her, forced herself to calm down, and carried her small bag into the bathroom. She casually flushed the toilet. Amidst the splashing sound of water, she pressed the button on her black-rimmed glasses. On the originally empty glass surface, a few rows of characters suddenly appeared. This information appeared in front of her in the shortest amount of time possible through the wireless network that covered the entire planet. After memorizing all the words and missions, Zhang Xiaoming gently exhaled and appeared to be much more relaxed. The senator was still negotiating with the president's office. The situation was relatively calm now. Due to the first charter, the Bureau of Proclamation had to remain neutral. As a low-level worker, she didn't have to worry too much about her true identity being discovered. Even if the Federation found out that she was a spy sent by the anti-government party, the most they could do was expel her back to S2. But what exactly was in the university town? Why did the senator want her to return to the capital planet? Was it because the senator knew that she was homesick? Once she thought of her stale family, Zhang Xiaoming's expression became gloomy again. In order to complete the mission given by the organization, it seemed that she had to play the role of a lost sheep. This was really a painful thing, sitting in the comfortable seat. Zhang Xiaoming tidied up the hair hanging beside her black-rimmed glasses. She subconsciously put her hand into her bag, but she found that the touch of her fingers was a little strange. She opened the bag in shock and was surprised to find an unopened bag of dog biscuits. If this bag of biscuits was hers, then what about the bag of biscuits on the bus? Did she eat someone else's biscuits? She had wronged him, but he had been quietly sharing things that belonged to him with her. Zhang Xiaoming stood up and looked around for the small-eyed boy, trying to find a way to apologize. However, how many flights were there in the capital airport? How could that boy appear on this plane so coincidentally? She sat down in confusion and shook her head regretfully. She knew that she had wronged the boy. More importantly, when she thought of the boy's gentle smile and the half-biscuit that he handed over, other than the thick embarrassment, there was also a trace of indescribable warmth. She hadn't felt such warmth in a long time. The world was so big. Perhaps she would never see that boy with that amiable smile again. There was no way she could apologize anymore. Zhang Xiaoming thought regretfully. She felt like she had missed out on something very precious. She felt empty and uncomfortable. She didn't know that right at the front of the plane, in the luxurious first-class cabin, Sulu was fidgeting as he adjusted the comfortable sofa position. He cautiously and carefully asked the stewardess, "Are you sure there's a free steak? The semi-synthetic kind?" "Yes." The stewardess almost couldn't hold back her laughter as she looked at the honest boy. Sulu breathed a sigh of relief. Only now did he feel that the expensive ticket was somewhat worth it. Although he was a fugitive and should keep a low profile, and a soldier who had just returned home from military service shouldn't have the money to sit in the first-class cabin, when he bought the ticket, he really couldn't resist the temptation of the semi-synthetic steak. Moreover, there was too much money in the card, so the young man's heart made him take the risk and buy a first-class ticket. He looked at the stewardess who was half squatting in front of him and said with concern, "Don't squat so much. You'll get tired." The stewardess was happy from the inside out and gave him a free, charming smile. Sulu was flustered by the bright light and quickly asked, "Excuse me, how long does it take to get to the university town?" Chapter 49. It had to be admitted that the group of five that built the foundation of the Federation's society did indeed possess wisdom and foresight that the later generations could not hope to reach. The words that glittered with the brilliance of civilization and the social structure that was improving day by day proved this point. Among the 3 districts of the capital ring that had beautiful environments and distinct seasons, the university town that had been established in the northern latitudes a long time ago was a reflection of the great efforts of the ancestors of the Federation. Only the 70 days of winter every year could allow the young people of the Federation to experience the cruelty of nature and the hardships of life in a prosperous and peaceful environment. The university town was actually not a city. It was a university campus that was built sporadically along the plains on both sides of the Rose River. Most of the universities on the capital planet were established here. As the development of the Federation's society increased day by day, the education level improved day by day, and the area of the various universities grew larger and larger. In the 34th Constitution era, they were gradually connected together and became a large community. The people of the Federation habitually called this large area the university town. However, the Federation of today seemed to have forgotten the good intentions of the ancestors of the Federation when they established the university here. The heating in the building was available 24 hours a day, and the air conditioning system kept the air that people breathed absolutely fresh. Once winter came, the students who were unwilling to go out of the building and spent their boring time in front of the crystal screen every day. How could they experience the so-called cruelty of nature? In the southeast area of the university town, there was an inconspicuous but extremely beautiful second-level college named UA University. Behind the dormitory of the university, on the road that led to the living area of the Federation, there was an even more inconspicuous gray bungalow. It stood awkwardly at the back door of UA University, making the scenery that was like pear blossoms in the garden become stiff. It was such a small bungalow that was far away from the main building of the campus, yet it still enjoyed central heating. The interior was as warm as spring, and the glass that was not coated with anti-frost was filled with a pleasant mist. Wiping away the mist on the glass with one hand, Sulu looked through the window at the snowflakes and frost on the pear trees in the garden. He smiled happily, thinking that this was a really nice place. It was still so beautiful in such a cold winter. When had he ever seen such a scenery when he was in Donglin? The sky in her hometown was overcast and gloomy. How could there be snowflakes that were whiter than pear blossoms? He had been at UA University for more than 10 days, following the suggestion left behind by his boss, Fengyu, on the holographic screen before his death. Furthermore, he was a fugitive with a disguised chip in his body, so naturally, he was unwilling to follow the information on the chip and go to the Department of National Defense's Retirement Resettlement Office to find a job. Thus, he decided to come here himself, submitting a job application and the strange recommendation letter in his backpack to the school, and easily obtained his current job. At first, he was a little puzzled as to why it was so easy to find a job, but later on, he realized that other than guarding the back door of UA University, this job only required him to be responsible for cleaning the road within 10 meters of him. On the surface, he was a member of the logistics department, but in reality, he was just a doorman. Without a doubt, he belonged to the lowest rung of society, and his salary was so low that it was pitiful. Fortunately, there was still a lot of money in that Zhongsanlin Union Bank card. Sulu did not come to Shanglin for money, nor did he have any strong desire to be below others, so he happily accepted this job and obtained this small, gray bungalow that belonged exclusively to him. If it was a normal citizen of the Federation, no matter how beautiful UA University's snowy scenery was, After looking at the plain white for more than 10 days, they would have long since gotten sick of it. However, Sulu was the same. He had never seen snow in his entire life, and looking at the snow for more than 10 days was just a small enjoyment for him. Right now, it was still the winter holidays, and there were not many students staying behind at UA University, so his work had not officially started yet. Every day, other than cleaning the snow, he had nothing else to do, so he was very free. Through the CD-ROM computer that the logistics department had placed in the doorway, Sulu would also go online every day when he was free. He seriously looked through the information on UA University, and only then did he know that this seemingly unremarkable school was, other than the schools directly under the Ministry of National Defense, one of the most outstanding universities in terms of the 3 major self-propelled mobile armor systems and the standard repair of warship installations. Of course, the 3 major military academies directly under the Ministry of National Defense and the Westwoods Military Academy could not possibly be located in a university town, so it was not a place that Sulu could casually blend into. Therefore, if Sulu wanted to satisfy his interests, the unremarkable UA University was indeed the best choice. Only now did he understand that his boss was still considering his own ideals in his arrangements, and his mood could not help but warm up like the air in the room. When he had just arrived at the university town, Sulu had tried to apply for an audit student certificate. After all, he still had quite a bit of money in his card, so he should be able to afford enough sponsorship. Unfortunately, the school's principal and dean in charge of reviewing new students had all returned to the various major cities on the capital planet for their holidays, just like the students. What made Sulu feel even more regretful was that UA University's library had also been closed for the past few days due to the update of the system and the holidays. This meant that he had no way of accessing the knowledge he was most interested in regarding the M-series mecha structure and maintenance. He also had no way of searching through the ancient books to see if there were any words or phrases regarding the mysterious trembling power within his body. In these 10 days of cold wind and snow, Sulu, who had nothing to do, other than watching Channel 23 every night and searching the internet for mecha maintenance knowledge that interested him, spent most of his remaining time nestled in his warm bed, closing his eyes to try to feel the slight changes in the trembling power within his body. He also tried to hide this dizzying trembling power as he thought about it on the ancient bell. It was snowing heavily outside, and he had not practiced that set of 10 postures for quite some time. He was also worried that others would see it, but the trembling in his muscles had gradually become more and more practiced as he slept. It even felt as though it could surge out at will. That night, accompanied by the familiar soreness in the deepest parts of his muscles and joints, Sulu fell into a deep sleep accompanied by the howling of the wind and snow. In his dreams, he seemed to see a cute girl with a head of purple hair marrying him as his wife, and him becoming the chief mechanic of a large company in the capital. He could repair all sorts of fun things every day, and he seemed to faintly hear some big shot announcing on the television that the truth behind the explosion had been exposed. There were so many happy things. In his deep sleep, Suli's lips curved into a sweet smile. He smiled so much that his body started to tremble. This trembling did not stop until the muscles under his skin started to twitch slightly. It seemed that with every twitch, his body would become a little stronger. Spring was bright and beautiful, with colorful flags fluttering in the wind. Shanglin Administrative Region S1, which was also the capital planet Snow and Cold, always came and went quickly. However, just as February entered, the snow on the banks of the Rose River had completely melted away, merging into the tranquil river that flowed south. Not a trace of it could be found anymore, leaving behind only a vast expanse of green fields and lush spring forests, as well as blocks of academy buildings that harmonized with the environment very well among the grass and trees. Today was the first day of school, and countless students took all sorts of transportation back to the big city academy. The campus, which had been quiet for 2 months, was once again bustling with noise and excitement. From time to time, there would be cars driving into the quiet UA University, accompanied by even more youthful female students walking in. A youthful atmosphere that made people yearn for rippled through the campus with them. Because there were too many students going to the Federation's living area to shop, the back gate, which had always been somewhat deserted, was now bustling with noise and chatter. It even drowned out the voices of the male students who were passionately criticizing the government by the fountain. Suddenly, there was a commotion at the entrance of the campus, followed by a buzz of discussion that abruptly stopped. The attention of the youths in the school was attracted by something, and they subconsciously stopped in their tracks, casting complicated gazes towards the entrance. The few male students by the fountain who were deeply influenced by Carlinism also stopped spurting out hot blood and walked over. However, they did not approach the back gate, but instead looked at it with a very strange gaze. A girl with shoulder-length hair, black-rimmed glasses, and a stack of books, calmly and slightly coldly walked in from the back gate of UA University under the gazes of countless people. The surrounding gazes contained too many emotions: pity, sympathy, disgust, disdain, envy, jealousy. The students of UA University easily recognized who this girl was, because a year ago, she was a popular figure among the freshmen of UA University, or rather, the rebellious child, Zhang Xiaoming. Zhang Xiaoming, who was born in a good family, began to come into contact with Carlinism after entering her first year of university. Unexpectedly, this girl resolutely gave up on her good life, gave up on her studies, and went to the faraway S2 administrative district, where the anti-government faction had the strongest influence in New Jersey. She began to shout for the people at the bottom of society, participating in one demonstration after another. As for what Zhang Xiaoming did after leaving UA University, her classmates did not know the exact details, but they knew that the rumor was true. This girl who had once shocked countless people was indeed tired of the so-called romance of justice, abandoned the darkness for the light, and returned to the embrace of the Federation. There was an awkward silence at the back gate of UA University. No one came forward to greet this black-rimmed girl. There was no welcome, only faint hostility and complicated gazes. Yes, when she left this campus a year ago, she should have known that there was no possibility of her coming back. If her ideals in the past were childish and laughable, but for the sake of an ordinary and comfortable life, she easily gave up her so-called ideals, then why did she leave in the first place? Why did she come back after leaving? Isn't that preposterous? This was probably the thought in the minds of most of the students. They looked at Zhang Xiaoming calmly, but full of pressure. Zhang Xiaoming, however, did not have the slightest bit of uneasiness. Her face was slightly lifted, and there was pride in her calmness as she walked towards her dormitory building. At this moment, the few male students who were preaching Carlinism at the fountain suddenly blocked her path and said angrily, "You betrayed your ideals." "My ideal is to live a good life." Zhang Xiaoming pushed up her black-rimmed glasses, ignored these people, and walked past them. The surrounding students looked at Zhang Xiaoming's back with strange and mocking expressions. The male student who was giving the speech was stunned for a moment, then he spat a mouthful of spittle behind her back. "This student, please wipe away these stains." A young man wearing a red cufflink walked to the side of the male student, handed him a piece of cloth, and said seriously, "Also, according to the regulations, I will recommend that the student office deduct 3 credits from you." The male student asked angrily, "Who are you?" The young man pulled on the red cufflink and answered, "I am a doorman." Chapter 50. At the corner of the road outside of UA University's back gate, there was a completely black Land Rover parked there. The body of the Land Rover looked particularly thick and heavy. The window film reflected the beautiful skylight, covering everything inside the car. The inside of this completely black Land Rover was strangely without a seat. Instead, it was filled with all kinds of electronic equipment and a camp bed. Even more strangely, there were a few staff members wearing gray uniforms who were vigilantly looking at the electronic equipment, and on the camp bed laid a lazy young man. This young man was about 24 or 25 years old. He had a pair of high-fidelity headphones in his ears. It was unknown what he was listening to, but looking at his squinted eyes, it gave people the impression that he had fallen asleep long ago. If Sulu were to see this young man's behavior, he would definitely think of the lazy boss uncle in any situation. To be able to maintain such a state in such a tense and busy working environment, if it wasn't that he was a little tired of the world, then it was that he didn't care about anything. A staff member took off the young man's headphones and said with a bitter smile, "Team leader, even if you're too lazy to listen to it, can you not use public equipment to listen to music?" Otherwise, if the director finds out, you'll be scolded again." The young man opened his eyes and yawned. His beautiful face had a trace of hangover fatigue. He muttered, "It's such a good thing. It's a pity that I don't use it to listen to music." Then, he looked at the small holographic screen of the electronic equipment and asked in boredom, "What's wrong? Nothing happened to that hot-blooded young woman, right?" "Nothing happened. There are a lot of young people coming back from S2. Why does the Bureau want us to keep an eye on her?" The staff member shrugged and pointed in the direction of UA University. "How big of a problem can a female student have? Zhang Xiaoming, coming back so casually like this. If there's no problem, then I'm an idiot." The young man yawned again. His name was Shi Qinghai. He graduated from the 1st Military Academy and was now working in the Federation Investigation Bureau. All the staff members in this completely black Land Rover were his subordinates. Bored, he looked in the direction of the back door of UA University and said in a seemingly casual manner, "A little lamb who knows how to mend its ways." Her parents are both civil servants of the Federation government. If there really was no problem, this little lamb should have cried and jumped into her parents' arms at the capital airport. She shouldn't have directly transferred to the university town alone and worked hard for more than 10 days before she regained her student status. Why didn't she meet with her parents? She's still rebellious and hasn't grown up yet. How could she be a pitiful girl who had her head injured? A hint of mockery flashed across Shi Qinghai's beautiful face. Although there are a lot of useless people in the Bureau, it's not a big problem to choose a surveillance target. As he spoke, the 6 people in the front and back of the Blackland vehicle stopped what they were doing. They listened to the leader's analysis and nodded in agreement. One of them looked at Shi Qinghai and said with a smile, "Leader, of course we know you're not an idiot." Of course, Shi Qinghai was not an idiot. He graduated from the 1st Military Academy with the highest grades. In his first year in the Federation Investigation Bureau, he successfully cracked a few spy cases. His ability was obvious to all. If he had followed this path steadily, everyone in the Investigation Bureau believed that the youngest deputy director in history would have been born. But no one would have thought that such a young talent would fall so quickly. An officer of the Investigation Bureau who was addicted to alcohol and women all day long was equivalent to giving up his future. Don't drink so much in the future. What's the difference if those women turn off the lights? Do you need to change every day? Shi Qinghai's subordinate said with a headache, "Don't always offend the boss. Otherwise, you would have been promoted long ago, and we would have followed suit." "Don't talk nonsense with me. Who hasn't been promoted under me? I'm too lazy to move. Isn't this university town good? There are so many beauties, especially young beauties." Shi Qinghai smacked his thin lips. His eyes were blurred and intoxicated. "How can I leave when I'm surrounded by the fresh scent of young bodies?" He got up from the single bed and rubbed his face that he forgot to wash in the morning. He said vaguely, "What career advancement? Bullshit. I want to be transferred to the Bureau of Proclamation. Those bastards, they only have one computer every day. They don't have to worry about anything. It's a fucking good place to retire." Having said that, he still had to do what he had to do, even if it was just on the surface. Shi Qinghai pretended to pick up the monitor and put it next to his ear to listen for a long time. At first, everything was normal, but gradually, his facial expression became wonderful and finally, it turned into an uncontrollable laughter. The concierge? I'm dying of laughter. Does he know that the student he asked to wipe off his saliva is the son of a senator? Shi Qinghai was rocking back and forth with laughter. He slapped his thigh and said, "This little concierge is interesting. It's rare to see such a serious person in this fucking society." "Sure. Team leader, lower your voice." A team member stared angrily at the unconscious Shi Qinghai and shouted in a low voice, "We are monitoring the situation. Not in the cinema." "Oh, that's right." Shi Qinghai came back to his senses and laughed. He opened the car door and walked out of the car. He said, "I have to watch UA University for at least a semester. It's too boring. I'm going to check out that fun concierge." The staff members of the Bureau of Investigation looked at each other. They didn't know what to do with this crazy and absurd team leader. Under the sun, the young team leader walked lazily like a hooligan. The staff members couldn't help but cover their eyes in embarrassment. One of them muttered, breaking the rules again. But why does Team Leader look like a hooligan? Team Leader grew up in the countryside. His father is a farmer. Is that so? That's a rare occupation. But what does this have to do with Team Leader being a hooligan? Didn't George Carlin once say that? The root of hooliganism is the unfair distribution of wealth. At the back gate of UA University, there was no class struggle between the rich students and the poor concierge. The male student who preached Carlinism left in anger. Sulu didn't pull him back. He forced him to kneel on the ground and wipe off his saliva. If he really did that, Sulu would doubt his own intelligence. He just followed the school rules and wrote a note about what happened today. He sent it to the special mailbox of the student office through the computer. Then he pulled out the hose and washed the sidewalk that had just been cleaned in the morning. He walked out earlier because he found that the male student seemed to have the intention to continue pestering the girl. So he thought of a way to stop him. If he hadn't seen that pair of black-rimmed glasses, Sulu wouldn't have remembered that the girl was the one who secretly ate his biscuits on the bus. Sulu didn't know what Carlinism was and didn't care about the negotiations between the government and anti-government. He just felt that the girl was too lonely with so many students coldly looking at her. What made him feel even more uncomfortable was that the male student actually blocked the girl's path. Of course, the more important reason was that he knew the girl. Even though the girl might not remember him, and even though the girl was rude to him back then. After cleaning the sidewalk, Sulu took a chair and sat next to the gate. He faithfully carried out his task. He closed his eyes under the warm sunlight and listened to the chips beeping sound from the monitor beside him. He was so comfortable that he almost fell asleep. In fact, he was still thinking about when he would be able to complete his bypass hearing, when he would be able to enter the library, and when he would be able to visit the experimental grounds. As an official of the Investigation Bureau, Shi Qinghai naturally didn't want to get acquainted with this inconspicuous concierge. It was just that he had spent the whole night with the blonde beauty and drank too much alcohol. His mind was too tired, and he couldn't sleep comfortably on the military bed of the land shuttle, so he decided to just walk around in the car. He bought a pack of cigarettes from the convenience store next to the school gate and lit one. He walked to the sidewalk and squatted down. He casually glanced at the young concierge from the corner of his eyes. It was just this glance, but Shi Qinghai's pupils slightly shrank. He didn't move his eyes away for a long time. He stood up and walked towards Sulu, who was sitting on the chair. After a moment of silence, he said with a smile, "I really envy your job. You can openly bask in the sun every day." Sulu raised his head in surprise. He didn't expect that on this strange planet, in this strange place, someone would actually take the initiative to talk to him. When he raised his head, he saw a street full of green trees and clear sunlight. A handsome young man in a wrinkled black suit was looking at him with a smile. Maybe it's quite comfortable." Sulu knew how to answer this question. He squinted his eyes, blocked the sunlight, and carefully said, "Do you want one?" Shi Qinghai smiled and passed a long filter cigarette. Sulu originally wanted to refuse, but he suddenly remembered that the boss uncle never left his cigarettes. He suddenly had an idea. He took the cigarette, put it in his lighter, and lit it up. He said thank you. Separated by the iron gates of UA University, the two of them smoked without knowing what to do. Under the sunlight, they both seemed to have endless worries. Shi Qinghai threw the cigarette, but to the ground, and stepped on it to extinguish it. He used his fingers to tidy up his messy hair. He suddenly stared at Sulu and said, "Sitting on the chair, but your body is hanging in the air. You're really hardworking to be able to practice the horse stance like this." Chapter 51. Sulu was shocked, but his expression didn't change. He didn't expect that this person's eyes would be so sharp that he could see through his strange sitting posture. He wasn't a professional spy, and he wasn't even a professional fugitive. He was just an ordinary young man with some talent in some areas. For some reason, he was forced to go into exile and hiding. After leaving Donglin, he kept reminding himself that he should keep a low profile and be inconspicuous. But after all, he hadn't received professional training, so there were always some problems in inappropriate places. Fortunately, with the help of the disguise chip, he didn't need to worry too much about his safety in the Federation Society. After passing the airport scan, he was full of confidence. He knew that as long as no one found out about his relationship with the boss, no one would suspect him. But today was only the first day of university, and a passerby had found out about his strange behavior. Sulu was so ashamed that he had the urge to face the wall. In fact, Sulu still underestimated himself and overestimated all the passersby in the Federation. In the Federation Society, there weren't many people like Shi Qinghai. He had studied observation in the first military academy and received 3 years of espionage training. Naturally, he had developed a completely different vision. Don't throw the cigarette butts? Sulu was a little flustered, but his voice didn't tremble at all as he said seriously to Shi Qinghai. Shi Qinghai smiled and picked up the cigarette butt. He had a strong interest in this little doorman. He felt that the doorman had a very wonderful feeling and was very similar to himself. It seemed that they were both keeping a big secret in their hearts. Shi Qinghai didn't want his secret to be known by others, so he didn't want to explore other people's secrets. After all, this person had nothing to do with him. Shi Qinghai looked at Sulu, yawned, leaned against the iron gate, and asked lazily, "There aren't many people in the training center now. You're still young, so I didn't expect you to like this kind of thing." Sulu could have chosen not to answer any of his questions, but first of all, that would be too strange. He did not know what this man in the suit did, and second of all, his small eyes had always been very good at judging people. In his opinion, this man in the suit was full of boredom and tiredness, and he did not have any malicious intentions. "I've never been to a body cultivation hall." Sulu shook his head and said, "What's the horse stance?" "Oh, the horse stance is the posture where your butt doesn't touch the ground. But that posture of yours is much more difficult than a normal horse stance. Don't be surprised that I know all this. You should know that I spent some time in a body cultivation hall." Shi Qinghai smiled, then extended his hand and nodded. Shi Qinghai, government worker. Then he said in a more serious tone, "Does guarding the door for the government count as a staff member?" Sulu was stunned for a moment, then he smiled as well. He extended his hand to shake the other party's hand and introduced himself. "Sulu, school worker." If guarding the door really counts as a proper job, the two people's hands passed through the bars of the metal gate and shook each other. A moment later, they let go. Shi Qinghai raised his eyebrows and said, "It's a bit like visiting a friend in prison. Looks like I'm the one locked up in prison. Why not me? I'm leaving first. I'll come and chat with you when I have the chance." Shi Qinghai looked at the figure of a woman walking over from not far away. He nodded slightly at Sulu, then left the school gate with an extinguished cigarette in his left hand. After closing the heavy car door, Shi Qinghai sat on the camp bed and stared at the female student passing through the school gate on the holographic screen. He used his index finger to point at her face, which was a bit blurry due to the pixels, and said, "Keep an eye on her. I don't care why this woman called Zhang Xiaoming came back, and I don't care what she wants from you at university. All you need to do is surround her and cut off all connections between her and any suspicious points." "Not fishing?" One of the team members asked curiously. "If there's really something wrong with this female student, this is a good opportunity." "I'm not interested in that." Shi Qinghai tidied up his wrinkled suit, lowered his head and said, "If we want to fish, we have to get close to her. That's the only way to ensure that we don't miss any clues. But the problem is that in our team, other than me, we all look like we've been through a lot. How are we going to pretend to be students? How about pretending to be a teacher?" Another team member suggested. Shi Qinghai raised his head, looked at him with pity and said, "If you think that your knowledge is enough to prevent you from being coaxed off the podium by the students, then you can give it a try." The team's time-sharing, monitoring, and social relations were methodically issued one order after another. The routine work of the Bureau of Investigation came to an end. Only Shi Qinghai and one of his subordinates were left in the black Land Rover. He suddenly lowered his voice and said, "Help me investigate a person. His name is Sulu." Do we need to file a record?" "No, I'm just interested in a personal matter." "A personal matter? If there's no record, there's no way to get a secret level. I don't think we'll find anything interesting." The team member obviously thought that the person he was investigating was a woman. At this time, Sulu did not know that Wrinkled Suit, whom he had just met, had begun to secretly investigate him. He just calmly looked at the girl in front of him, hoping that she would turn around and look at him. Unfortunately, the naked Zhang Xiaoming seemed to have a lot on her mind. She lowered her head and hugged her books as she walked out of the school gate. She didn't notice his existence at all. The night was getting late. The Federation Bureau of Investigation's Linhai State Field Office building was still brightly lit. The busy staff walked through the floors. Linhai State was one of the big states in the capital ring's S1 administrative region. Especially after the university town area was transferred to Linhai State, the area of Linhai State and the workload of the civil servants had greatly increased. The fourth section of the office was responsible for preventing the infiltration of the anti-government forces. Now that the Federation was stable, the anti-government forces had already given up on the policy of armed struggle. Under the pressure of the empire, they were negotiating cooperation with the government and officially participating in the election. The fourth section had become the most leisurely department in the entire Federation Bureau of Investigation. The most leisurely official in the most leisurely department, Shi Qinghai, wasn't going in and out of the major nightclubs in the city to flirt with beautiful women and drink liquor like his colleagues had imagined. Instead, he was sitting in his own office, staring blankly at the holographic screen in front of him. Shi Qinghai didn't want to investigate the secret of the little gatekeeper, but he subconsciously wanted to get closer to the young man. He also had a secret in his heart that he couldn't let others know, so he had to find out whether the gatekeeper who knew how to do the horse stance had any kind of background. The results of the investigation quickly came out. It was a very clean file. A recently retired tunnel repairer had returned to the capital and was doing a very ordinary job. There didn't seem to be anything out of the ordinary. So it's a field mouse and a very clean one at that. Shi Qinghai smiled as he looked at the holographic screen. It's a pity that I can't find out more specific information about this guy called Su Lu. But why is it so coincidental that he came to the same university town as Zhang Xiaoming? Such an obvious loophole. It seems that he's not in the same field, but just an interesting guy. All the information of the Federation's citizens from birth was stored in the vast Federation's computer monitoring network. The most comprehensive information could be obtained through the chip at the back of their neck. However, the Federation's first charter protected the privacy of every citizen to the strictest extent. Unless the relevant department issued an application, the privacy of the citizens was strictly prohibited from being known by anyone. The spirit of the first charter had been deeply ingrained in people's hearts for countless years, so Shi Qinghai didn't find it strange. He didn't continue to investigate Su Li's relationships. His beautiful but tired face suddenly showed a trace of sadness. After a moment of silence, he threw all the information he found about Su Lu into the document processor. He believed that for a long time, no one would investigate Su Lu again. I can finally find a blank piece of paper to draw on. Damn it, I've been lonely for so long. I need to find a playmate, right? Shi Qinghai said something that he didn't believe himself. He inserted the car remote key into the standard interface of the computer. An inconspicuous small program began to lurk in the internal network. According to Su Li's filter, from this moment on, if the Federation Investigation Bureau's field office wanted to investigate the little concierge, they couldn't hide it from him under the sun. Su Lu hugged the alloy steel ball casting and walked down the high stairs while panting. As he walked, he complained in his heart about the professor's discrimination against audit students. After every component class, he was responsible for returning the courseware. It had been 3 months since he came to Yue University. After paying a sponsorship fee, he finally obtained the school's audit student certificate. The school didn't mind this retired soldier who seemed to have some savings to become a member of the class. The Federation implemented a 5-hour workday. Su Lu was too lazy to look for a house in Linhai, so he simply continued to work as a concierge, which had no future. Every day, other than eagerly learning the mechanical engineering knowledge that he was interested in, he didn't have much to do. At night, he just slept in the concierge's room. As for the other old men who were responsible for guarding the door, he didn't have much contact with them. Everything seemed to have returned to the ordinary but fulfilling life in Donglin District. The only difference was that today, Su Lu didn't have a boss lying lazily on the sofa beside him. Oh, he was wrong. There was another difference, and it was the same lazy government official in front of him. Why are you here again? Su Lu saw the guy wearing a tattered, expensive suit under the stone stairs of the teaching building. His mind was in a mess, and he almost dropped the casting on his foot. Chapter 52. Sulu had always been puzzled by this beautiful man in front of him, who had a split hairstyle and liked to smoke a 37 brand long filter cigarette. They had only chatted for a while under the sun, but in the past few months, this man had been coming to him frequently, inviting him to drink and chat with him. But he was not a man who looked like a woman, and this man seemed to be more charming. Sulu found it a little hard to understand the other party's persistence, but what was strange was that he didn't seem to resist interacting with this official. Perhaps it was because the other party's laziness and world-weariness was somewhat similar to that of a certain person who had passed away. Sulu walked past him with the cast in his arms and begged for mercy in a low voice. "I vomited for a long time last night. Please forgive me. I can't hold my liquor, and I can't take it anymore. Put this broken thing down first." Shi Qinghai looked at him with a smile, his handsome face glowing under the sun. He said, "I won't drink today. I'll take you to find a woman." "A woman?" Sulu opened his mouth wide and could not react for a long time. "Mr. Shi? Are we that close?" Sulu looked at him helplessly. Mr. Shi was Shi Qinghai's self-proclaimed name. This young official seemed to have always yearned for the evil feudal society of the empire. "After 20 rounds of drinking in 2 months, you should be cooked, right? Apart from stones, what in the world can't be cooked?" "Yes, I was a soldier in Donglin. The people of the Federation have always thought that the people of Donglin are stones. Stones also need friends. Is it that simple to be friends? Of course. If you are pleasing to the eye and comfortable to get along with, you are a friend." Sulu seemed to understand something and nodded with a smile. Shi Qinghai very seriously pulled out the bangs on his forehead and said to him, "I'm very bored by myself. I see that in addition to working every day, you do experiments in class and eat bread in the library. You're even more bored than me. I really can't stand it, so I decided to let you see what real life is like." "Real life is a woman?" "No." Shi Qinghai shook his slightly oily hair and said seriously, "It's a beauty." Beside the busiest street in Linhai, the door of the biggest nightclub, 13, was shut tight. Inside the iron gate, the rhythm of the music was constantly changing. The dazzling spotlights in the spacious venue and the dim environment did not contradict each other. The amber liquid in the open-mouthed glass on the table released an intoxicating wine aroma, mixing with the alluring perfume that pervaded the entire nightclub, weaving a charming environment. "We used to drink in taverns, so I thought you were a very simple veteran. I didn't expect you to be so familiar with this kind of place." Shi Qinghai lowered his head and looked at the wine in the glass in front of him. He seemed to be trying to distinguish how many colors would be reflected in the dim light of the wine. At this time, Sulu was looking at the girls dancing on the bar counter in tight-fitting shorts, exposing their snow-white thighs. She tried her best to open her eyes wider, but because she was so focused, she didn't understand Shi Qinghai's words for a moment. She was stunned for a moment before she turned around and looked at Shi Qinghai. Shi Qinghai's black hair drooped on the table in front of him. He said weakly, "An 18-year-old veteran can sit so comfortably in the most expensive nightclub in Linhai, and you don't have a nosebleed looking at those beautiful girls. I don't believe that you haven't been to such a place before." "I just passed the legal drinking age not long ago." Sulu sat up straight on the sofa and said with a smile. Of course, he was no stranger to nightclubs. Although he rarely went there, he had mixed with a group of orphans since he was young. Although he lived in the remote Donglin, he had developed a sense of dry and spicy temperament. Although his honest and simple face did reflect a part of his way of thinking, it more successfully concealed the natural calmness and firmness of an orphan, the decisiveness with which he did things, and the hardships and experiences that could make people calmer. "You look a little older than your actual age." Shi Qinghai raised the wine glass in his hand and signaled to a girl on the table not far away. His eyes returned to Sulu's face again, and he was silent for a moment. He had drunk with Su 23 Sierra Leone and Leone's times, and it seemed that the little concierge would get drunk at the end of each time. But the problem was, no matter how drunk he he didn't mention anything about the past in his drunken ramblings. This small detail made the sensitive Shi Qinghai feel strange. He didn't ask the concierge, but patiently waited for the day when the mystery would be revealed. A young official of the Federation and a college student, a concierge, were originally people from two different worlds, but Shi Qinghai wanted to be friends with him. On the one hand, it was because he was bored, and on the other hand, it was because he had a certain sense of closeness to Su Lu. And the fact that Su Lu dared to be his friend made Shi Qinghai think more highly of Su Lu. He had long found that he had underestimated Su Lu from the beginning. Although he was indeed a blank piece of paper, he was very stubborn. It was not easy to paint him with external colors. I know you have your secrets. Shi Qinghai lazily laid down his upper body again and looked at Su Li's face across the wine glass. I never believed that you had a goduncle who gave you a large sum of money, enough for you to sit in first class luxuriously. But don't worry, you are not a government official, and no one will be interested in investigating you. You are interested in me, aren't you? Su Lu looked at him and said after a moment of silence, if you didn't insist on asking me these things, maybe I wouldn't have talked to you. After all, you and I are from two different worlds. I don't know which world you are from. To be exact, I don't even know which world I am from. Shi Qinghai glanced at him mockingly, drank all the wine in the cup, and said, I just find you pleasing to the eye, that's all. By the way, you will pay for today's wine. This month's bonus has not been paid yet, so you have to pay for it. Su Lu carefully looked at the label of the wine bottle on the table. After drinking for a period of time, he could roughly tell the price of this bottle of wine. Although it was a little expensive, it was not that he could not afford it. Since the boss left him the money, he would spend it on his behalf. After all, there did not seem to be much to spend on over there. He was about to say something when he suddenly saw a group of young men and women drinking a tube of blue liquid at a table not far away. It seemed to be very tasty. What is that? Should we try one? Su Lu asked. A new drug, sky blue. Shi Qinghai looked at him mockingly. Do you want to try it? Su Lu shook his head. He thought that the capital planet was a bustling and scary place. He could not help but sigh when he thought that there were people who dared to take drugs in broad daylight. At that moment, another fragrant wind blew over and into Shi Qinghai's arms. He could not help but sigh again. He thought that he was a country bumpkin from a remote and underdeveloped area. He was still not used to this kind of situation. Shi Qinghai was very handsome, or rather, very beautiful. Although he often didn't wash his hair, that pair of extremely deep and charming eyes of his were always emitting electricity. Under the dim lights of the nightclub, the electricity in his eyes gradually blurred, attracting countless women. During these days of drinking, Su Lu had seen many waitresses looking at Mr. Shi with resentful eyes. Tonight, he was used to the scene of flying women pouncing on men. However, Su Lu could see that Shi Qinghai was not happy. If he was, he probably would not have asked him to drink. Shi Qinghai said that he was lonely. How could such a literary phrase come out of the mouth of a government official? Although he said that he was a gatekeeper for the government, who would believe him? However, since Shi Qinghai did not ask about his past, he did not want to ask about Shi Qinghai's background. It had been a long time since he left Donglin, but the disguised chip in his body had never malfunctioned. Su Lu could already face everything in life naturally and not always treat himself as a fugitive. It was good that he could live naturally and keep his past a secret. If he treated everything and everyone in life with vigilance and suspicion, what was the point of such a life? It was getting late. Shi Qinghai was intoxicated by the night, the beautiful women, and his friends. He mumbled something and fell asleep on the sofa. Su Lu, who had drunk more than half a bottle of strong liquor, did not feel drunk. Instead, he became slightly excited because of the alcohol. He reluctantly moved his gaze away from the beautiful women and called the waiter. He paid the bill on the card machine held respectfully in the waiter's hand and walked out of the nightclub with Shi Qinghai. This was the busiest time in the nightclub. However, Shi Qinghai and Su Lu drank too fast, so they left earlier than the others. Su Lu, who was carrying a heavy body, could not find his way in the dim light. He did not know how many people he bumped into, but he apologized profusely. He knew that under the influence of alcohol and the countless eyes of the opposite sex, a small friction could cause big trouble. After walking to the entrance of the nightclub with great difficulty, Sulu was refreshed by the breeze in his face. However, he immediately smelled a fragrance and a sense of danger. He looked up and saw 3 expensive cars parked in front of the nightclub. About 7 or 8 people got out of the cars and walked towards the nightclub. The people walking beside them were all dressed in black. They were of average build and looked indifferent. They seemed to be bodyguards. The 2 men and 1 woman walking in the middle were dressed in bright clothes. Their temperaments were cold and reserved. The woman was wearing a short red trench coat. Her charming face carried a trace of arrogance and meanness. The 2 men beside her were wearing a blue suit, while the other was arrogantly wearing a student uniform. The only thing they had in common was that their eyes were looking straight ahead. They walked with the wind and did not shift their gaze at all. They were not simple people and did not walk the usual path. Sulu did not want to block the way of such arrogant people. He quickly dragged the drunk Shi Qinghai to the side of the corridor. However, as luck would have it, when the beautiful woman in red brushed past the 2 of them, Shi Qinghai seemed to have smelled the perfume on her. He opened his blurry eyes and woke up. He whistled in her direction and said vaguely, "Beauty, you sprayed too much on your DVC." When they heard these 2 words, their footsteps stopped at the same time. The leading man smiled and turned to look at the corridor, as if he wanted to know who had the guts to flirt with his sister. There was a hint of coldness in his gentle smile. Chapter 53. DVC was a type of perfume, a very expensive perfume produced in the Bali region of the northern continent of planet S3. The annual production was extremely low, and it was impossible to come into contact with such a luxury item unless one was extremely wealthy or had an extremely high social status. Shi Qinghai had been wandering among women for the past few years. Whether it was a convenience store clerk, a lonely and bored young married woman, or a cold-looking career woman, he wanted to lift the curtain and become a guest of all of them. To be able to reach such a standard, he was naturally no stranger to women's products. Furthermore, he had indeed had a one-night stand with 1 or 2 women of high status. Therefore, even if he was drunk to the point of delirium, he could still call out the name of the DVC. Furthermore, he was extremely dissatisfied with the red-clothed woman for spraying too much. Women who could afford luxury items were naturally not simple women. To them, everything that represented money and status was not important, but style was the key. It was not important to use DVC. The key was to use it well. Saying that she sprayed it too much was like saying that she burned money to light cigarettes. It was tasteless. In the eyes of a woman of this level, being accused of having no style was the most unacceptable thing. Therefore, a flame of anger suddenly rose in her pair of charming but cold eyes. Seeing that the group of people who were walking with a swagger suddenly stopped because of Shi Qinghai's words, especially when he saw the cold smile on the leader's face, Su Li's heart unsurprisingly jumped. From a glance at the nightclub corridor from afar, he knew that these people were not simple and was afraid of provoking them. Just as he was about to walk past them, something really happened. Sulu knew what DVC was, and he did not know how much the black cars in front of the nightclub were worth, but this did not prevent him from seeing the background of the other party and their displeasure. A bitter smile appeared on his face, and he turned his head to look at Shi Qinghai, thinking to himself that this kid was not doing it on purpose, right? It seemed that Shi Qinghai was not doing it on purpose, because at this time, he had fallen asleep sweetly on Su Li's shoulder. His body reeked of alcohol, and his eyelids did not even blink. Sulu sighed in his heart and sincerely said to those people, "I'm really sorry. My friend drank too much and spoke nonsense." Su Li's appearance was very ordinary. Only his pair of straight eyebrows that were as sharp as a knife was somewhat unique. But what was very strange was that his pair of eyes that were often squinted always revealed a trustworthy expression, and his tone of voice was extremely sincere, which made it very easy for people to have a good impression of him. It was probably because of this that the little girl on the ancient clock chose to trust him without hesitation. He didn't know if his sincerity and honesty would be of any use today. The man, who was obviously the core of the group, narrowed his eyes slightly. He looked at Sulu and paused for a moment. Suddenly, he smiled. The green robe on his body was like a willow leaf in the harsh winter, like a knife. The man's of course, of the woman of the group, of the group. The young man in the student's uniform beside them had a strange expression. He looked deeply at Sulu, who was supporting the drunk man. No wonder the uniform looked familiar. It was the uniform of Yue University. Sulu recognized him. This arrogant young man who dared to wear a student's uniform and enter a nightclub for entertainment was the male student who had a small conflict with him 2 months ago at the back door. Sulu had stayed in the school for several months. After all, he had the status of a gatekeeper and auditing student, so he didn't have much interaction with the real students. However, he knew that this male student's father was a state representative of Linhai and could be considered to be born into an influential family. However, what did the other party's last glance mean? It seemed to be a warning or a reminder. Sulu did not think too deeply about that student's gaze. He only thought that the son of a state senator was actually the follower of that pair of man and woman. It seemed that these people were indeed important people that he could not afford to offend. Looking at the man in the green suit and the woman in the red trench coat walking into the nightclub, he let out a sigh of relief. At least he did not cause any trouble. He grew up with the orphans on Zhonglo Street since he was a child. He believed in the philosophy of life that if you respect me, I will respect you back 10 times. He always thought that since Shi Qinghai had offended the other party with a slip of the tongue when he was drunk, he had already humbled himself and sincerely apologized to the other party. The other party should be appeased, and there would not be any follow-up development. But soon after, he understood the warning in the eyes of the man in the student's uniform. Only then did he realize that he was indeed a country bumpkin from a remote area. He actually naively thought that these people were so easy to deal with. Throw that drunkard into the washroom to sober up. Feed him 2 piles of feces to rinse his mouth. His mouth stinks even more than the toilet bowl. The woman in the red trench coat walked into the nightclub, coldly leaving behind a sentence. The wind at the entrance of the nightclub lifted the hem of her trench coat, revealing a pair of straight and tender legs. It was extremely pleasing to the eye, but the words that came out of her mouth were extremely cold. Hearing this sentence, Sulu stood there in a daze, thinking that he had misheard. He couldn't understand why the other party wanted to humiliate him in such a way with just a few words. Moreover, he had already apologized. Most importantly, he could tell that the woman in red wasn't joking when she said those cold words. Her tone was calm, but there was an irresistible air to it. Suli's heart seemed to have fallen into an ice cellar. Only now did he realize that the attitudes of different social classes towards each other were completely different. In the face of the other party's strength, he, who was at the bottom, should have felt angry. He was indeed angry, but what he felt more was a kind of helpless sorrow. He looked at the back of the woman in the red and said with a last glimmer of hope, "I apologize to you on his behalf." In this world, some people never accept apologies. Even if a ladyboy knows a few bottles of perfume, he is still a ladyboy in the end. A drunkard who said the wrong thing has to pay the price. Little friend, if you want to leave safely, don't talk anymore. The slender thighs of the woman in the red windbreaker could be seen under the hem of her clothes. She did not turn around and walked deeper into the nightclub. The ladyboy she was talking about was naturally the beautiful Mr. Shi. From her words, it seemed that this woman with a strong background did not have any ill feelings towards Sulu. The man in the blue suit patted her affectionately. He did not care about what happened behind him at all. It seemed that this kind of thing often happened to these people. Only the son of the state senator who was following them turned around and gave Sulu a sympathetic look. He thought to himself that Sister Yuzi's mood seemed to be really gloomy recently. However, although he sympathized with the little gatekeeper at the school, he did not have the courage to speak up for him, because he knew that this pair of brother and sister always meant what they said. At the end of the corridor, the owner of the nightclub was already respectfully waiting for the arrival of this group of people with a group of people. The expression in the eyes of the man in the blue suit changed slightly. He looked ahead and said to his sister beside him, "In the future, don't be so childish. If you are really angry, don't use this kind of method. I know you have been in a bad mood recently, but you have to know that he has always disliked your temper. If his family had not asked him to go out and train, And if he had not happened to be in the same school as us, and if we had not known his identity by chance, maybe we would not have had the chance to know him at all. The woman in red raised her thin eyebrows slightly and said, "We have known each other for so many years, but he still avoids me like I am a fly. I can't take this lying down." The man in the blue suit frowned slightly. He lowered his voice and scolded seriously, "Don't forget his identity. Why would he bother to avoid you? If he doesn't want to see you, you can forget about getting close to him for the rest of your life." While speaking, this pair of brother and sister completely forgot about the matter at the end of the corridor. In their opinion, since those insignificant people made them feel a little unhappy, they should naturally pay the price and let their mood return to normal. Since they had already spoken, there would naturally be someone who would handle this matter properly. That drunkard must eat shit, not a mouthful less. At the entrance of the VIP aisle, this group of people gathered together with the nightclub's behind-the-scenes boss. In the face of this behind-the-scenes boss's extremely polite greeting, the man in the blue suit's expression appeared much gentler. This was because he knew that although his family's influence seemed strong, in fact, its foundation was not solid. Moreover, the military division was thousands of miles away, and its influence in Lin Hai was not as strong as imagined. At this time, he was in Lin Hai, so he had to be careful about everything and not be too arrogant. Although the other party was only a nightclub owner, being able to have such influence near the university town, he presumably was not a simple character. Of course, the so-called careful in his heart did not include the two people at the entrance of the nightclub. After exchanging a few pleasantries, the man in the blue suit suddenly frowned. This was because he found that the nightclub owner in front of him seemed to be somewhat restless, and his eyes kept glancing over his shoulder and outside. The nightclub owner noticed the change in the man's expression, and his heart thumped. Fearing that the other party would be unhappy, he asked as calmly as possible, "Is that big guy outside your subordinate?" The man in the blue suit frowned, and his heart was slightly surprised. He knew that the other party was talking about Hook. At this time, Hook was doing that thing outside the nightclub according to his sister's instructions. Hook was the brother and sister's playmate since childhood, and later became their personal bodyguard in name. He had worked hard in the first academy for 3 years, and his strength was amazing. The man in the blue suit had never thought that Hook would have any problems doing such a small thing. The group of people turned around and looked outside the nightclub. The brother and sister's faces stiffened slightly, and then immediately returned to normal. However, the brother's pupils shrank imperceptibly, and he was somewhat shocked. In a place like the nightclub, Hook had met with a tough opponent. In the open space outside the nightclub, Su Lu was holding the drunk Ching Hai in his arms, vigilantly watching the big guy in front of him. A trace of blood was flowing from the corner of his mouth, and the big guy opposite him was not doing well either. There was a deep footprint on his chest, and he was coughing incessantly. Chapter 54. The pair of siblings left without looking back, leaving behind a cold and disdainful back view. Sulu had already shaken off his previous anxiety and became much calmer. There were many unfairness in this world, and those who were born with a golden spoon in their mouths did not seem to care about the lives and dignity of others. Since that was the case, he would not apologize or plead anymore. He had done what he had to do, and he was no longer in the wrong. But what should he do next? Looking at the big guy walking towards him, Su Li's heels left the ground, and he quietly tiptoed. It was the starting position of the lower body that the uncle had taught him. At this time, Su Lu did not know that the big guy with the oppressive aura was called Hook, and he did not know that the other party was a powerful figure who had been honed in the first military academy. However, he could see that the other party was powerful because the big guy was not very strong. It was just that his frame was particularly large, and the muscles hidden under his black clothes were not very strong. In this world, there were not many people who had a deeper understanding of muscle strength than Su Lu. He could see at a glance that the big guy's bones were strong, and the muscles under his clothes were not thick. In conclusion, this big guy was a natural at close combat. More importantly, Su Li's heart was still hesitating. The shadow of his identity as a fugitive had gradually faded under the sunshine of Yue University, but in the face of today's situation, he couldn't help but think twice about it. The big guy walked in front of him, lowered his body, and said, "Get out of the way." Su Li's nose twitched, and he suddenly smelled the other party's identity as a soldier. Probably only a soldier could reveal such a stern feeling, just like the fat captain on the ancient bell. Of course, the big guy in front of him was not as oppressive as the fat captain, but he was still a very powerful figure. The siblings were not very old, and it seemed that their father was definitely a big shot in some military region. Besides the 4th military region, there were 3 other military regions in the capital ring. No matter which military region they were from, they were all people that Su Lu could only look up to. If he had a conflict with such a person, would the other party investigate him afterward and dig up the details of his identity as a fugitive? While Su Lu was still thinking, Hook, who was now the internal security officer of the 2nd Military Region's logistics department, had already arrived in front of him. He reached out his hand to grab Shi Qinghai's neck, who was in Su Li's arms. The mission he accepted was to drag this drunken transvestite to the toilet to eat shit. Other than that, he didn't have any other thoughts. The sudden attack interrupted Su Li's train of thought. At this time, he was holding Shi Qinghai in his arms. Subconsciously, he raised his left hand and placed it vertically on Hook's pulse. Hook's arm was as hard as a rock, but when his meridian was suddenly pushed, he couldn't help but feel numb. He subconsciously lowered his elbow. Su Lu didn't have time to think. He still relied on his body's instincts to step forward and block his opponent's knee. Hook exerted force and continued to lower his elbow, but because of Su Li's forearm in front of him, he couldn't do it. Hook's rock-like arm ruthlessly smashed into Su Li's left shoulder, and the tip of his elbow touched Su Li's cheek. At the same time, Su Li's left leg, which was previously pressing against his opponent's knee, suddenly bounced up and kicked his opponent's chest like a flying rock. Hook let out a muffled groan and retreated 2 meters away, coughing nonstop. From the first contact of skin to the last separation, the 2 combatants had been fighting within a very small area. They moved according to the touch of skin and the instinctive reaction of their muscles. In the blink of an eye, the fight had already ended. The soldier Hook had underestimated his opponent at the beginning, while Su Lu couldn't use his full strength because he was holding on to Shi Qinghai. Both parties were at a disadvantage, and the fight could barely be considered a draw. Hook looked at the footprint on his chest and was a little shocked. He couldn't understand how this ordinary-looking young man in front of him could react so quickly. From the moment his foot touched the ground to the moment it landed on his chest, it was so fast that it was a little dazzling. What made him feel even more inexplicable was how such an ordinary-looking thin body could be so resilient. Although his elbow didn't connect, his arm had hit his opponent's shoulder and the tip of his elbow had brushed past his opponent's cheek. If it was a normal person, they would have already fainted. Even if they didn't faint, they would definitely feel unbearable pain. However, the kid in front of him didn't have any expression on his face. There was only a small cut in his mouth and some blood, but there was no sign of him collapsing. It seemed that the person that sister you wanted to deal with today wasn't an ordinary person. A trace of ruthlessness flashed across Hook's eyes. He heavily hammered his own chest and used the shock of his strength to stop coughing. Once again, he walked towards the ordinary-looking young man. Su Lu knew why, and when he made his move, he mocked himself in his heart. Keep a low profile, keep a low profile. Shi Qinghai, dog shit, dog shit. The other party wanted to make Shi Qinghai eat shit. He couldn't just watch this playboy get dragged to the toilet. Although the 2 of them were just fair-weather friends, he was still the first and only friend he had in a foreign land. If Shi Qinghai was sober at this time, Su Lu might have tried to hide himself. However, the problem was that Shi Qinghai was drunk and unconscious. When his friend didn't have the ability to resist, he couldn't just let his friend be humiliated. This was one of Su Li's principles, and it even exceeded his fear in certain aspects. Since he had already made his move, there was no need to care about anything else. The current situation was like this, and so was life. When one was pressured to a certain extent and still had to hide because of their identity, that wasn't being cautious. Instead, it was being a useless bitch that was famous because of the Federation's Women's Day. Living without principles or dignity was not something that Su Lu could accept easily. Looking at the tall soldier approaching him, Su Lu felt a sense of danger. He knew that the other party wouldn't underestimate him this time and would attack him with all his strength. Just like the angry bull on the green grassland on the other side of the electronic fence, when it felt hurt and humiliated, it would burst forth with its greatest strength. Sulu looked at the other party vigilantly. He loosened his right hand and threw the drunk Shi Qinghai to the ground. His feet were slightly apart, and he tiptoed again, maintaining a posture that could explode at any time. Shi Qinghai was thrown onto the cold, hard marble floor with a muffled thud. Under the pain, he mumbled a few words and actually fell asleep again. Sulu wasn't worried about whether this young master would feel uncomfortable. Although the other party was too much of a bastard today, if Shi Qinghai hadn't said those drunken words, nothing would have happened. Sulu couldn't wait to throw this drunkard to his death. Hook walked in front of Sulu. His well-defined face suddenly tightened. With a muffled groan, he swept his arms horizontally like two stone pillars. Sulu seemed to have reacted at the same time. He flipped his arms up and blocked the attack. However, he did not expect that the other party would use his arms to wrap around him. Relying on the enormous strength, he took a step forward. The distance between the two was instantly reduced to an extremely small size. The big soldier's posture was very ugly. It was as clumsy as a bear hugging someone, but in reality, it was a reflection of his incomparably rich combat experience. He discovered that Sulu's movements were fast, so he used this clumsy method to prevent Sulu from displaying his speed. If the two of them were tied together, what would Sulu do if he lifted his leg? Hook was already determined. His left hand tightly gripped the back of Sulu's head, and he lowered his head to smash it. If this hammer landed on Sulu's head, the bridge of his nose would immediately break, and blood would definitely flow out wildly. At the same time, he increased the strength of his other arm, forcibly pushing back Sulu's defense. He twisted his shoulder, and the tip of his elbow once again smashed towards Sulu's temple. With these two moves, if Sulu didn't react properly, his head would bleed and he would faint on the spot. However, the hammer didn't land. Sulu's palm had unknowingly blocked the space between his eyebrows. His 5 fingers spread out like a cotton flower, blocking the other party's face. Although this hastily extended palm couldn't completely block the other party's heavy hammer, Sulu only felt a slight pain in his palm with his palm as a buffer. His head was a little dizzy, but he wasn't really injured. Sulu's other arm didn't forcefully block the other party's elbow. Instead, it viciously smashed towards the exposed armpit behind the other party's twisted shoulder. The middle finger of his fist protruded slightly, and he viciously smashed that spot. His left leg went in again. The distance between the two was too close. Sulu couldn't raise his leg, but his body suddenly shrunk, and his knee was raised, landing squarely on the other party's thigh. If not for the other party's quick reflexes, this knee would have hit the man's vital point. The two separated again. The back of Sulu's neck was smashed by the elbow. Blood flowed out from his nostrils, and his forehead was slightly red and swollen. Other than that, he wasn't injured. On the other hand, Hook's armpit was hit by a jab, and his thigh was hit by a treacherous jab. An unbearable numbing pain spread through his taut muscles, and he couldn't stand properly. Hook's gaze was like a hook, as if he wanted to hook out all of Sulu's internal organs. Ever since he graduated from the first academy, how long had it been since he was injured? This brat in front of him didn't have any tricks up his sleeve, so how could he possibly defeat him? Sulu used his sleeve to wipe the blood from his nose. He stared vigilantly at the tall soldier with astonishing strength. There was actually a pattern to his attacks, and they were all variations of the 10 postures that Uncle Boss had taught him. Perhaps it was because he had practiced for too long that it had become instinct. Or perhaps it was because he had mastered the postures over the past few months at Yue University where he had practiced very little. Now, he seemed to be able to perform the 10 postures as he pleased. After defeating a strong enemy who was probably a soldier, Sulu wasn't excited at all. Instead, he vigilantly observed the movements around him. He didn't manage to knock Hook down because his strength was far inferior to his opponent's. Of course, if he dared to release the fiery and trembling power in his body, perhaps he would only need 1 round to knock Hook down. The problem was, no matter how hard he tried, he had to protect Mr. Shi from eating shit. Unless he was in a desperate situation, Su Lu would definitely not release the magical power in his body. You're pretty good to be able to fight Hook to a draw. The crowd that had been attracted by the fight surrounded Su Lu. The man in the green suit looked at Su Lu playfully. A strange look flashed across his eyes, but it soon turned into calm disdain. He said, "I won't kill you." Chapter 55. At the entrance of the 13 nightclub in Lin Hai, a large group of people were watching the scene with different expressions. The irrelevant people had already been cleared away by the staff of the nightclub and would not affect what was happening here. You are all people of status. Su Lu heard the words clearly. He looked at him and said, "Why bother arguing with people like us?" This ordinary-looking young man and the bodyguards of the siblings were at least evenly matched. Under such circumstances, the words that seemed to show weakness were naturally more powerful. The man looked at Su Lu and said with a smile, "My sister wants to teach that drunkard a lesson. No one can stop her." Why was the smile of a privileged person so hateful and cold? Su Li's ordinary-looking face did not show much expression. He said, "He is my friend, and this is your fault. If you did something wrong, you should not continue to do it." Donglin people? The man recognized Su Li's accent and said, "They say that Donglin people are like rocks in the toilet, smelly and hard. It is true, but even if you are a rock, I will crush you today." The nightclub owner had been quietly accompanying the man. He said softly, "Major Zhou, these two people ruined your mood. Why do you have to do it yourself? Let us deal with them." Zhou Yu, the current major of the operations department of the 3rd Military Region, was able to get such a rank at his age and sit in such a position. His family was naturally very powerful. According to reliable sources, the father of this pair of siblings should be the deputy director of the logistics department of the National Defense Department. The nightclub owner had received a hint from some people in Lin Hai and deliberately made friends with this young major. At this time, he carefully asked for help. He was worried that the young major would think that he was a busybody, because after all, he rarely interacted with people in that circle. The nightclub owner had never thought that the young man in front of him could fight against the siblings. So what if he could fight? Today's society relied on strength, and strength was definitely not the ability to fight. "Thank you." Zhou Yu understood the meaning of the nightclub owner's words. He gently smiled and pointed at Su Li's nose and said, "I don't want to waste too much time. Why don't you step aside? I'll treat this drunkard to shit, or you can eat it for him." "I don't have the habit of eating shit." Su Lu wiped the blood from his nose. Looking at the people surrounding him, he finally couldn't control the anger in his heart. No matter how weak they were, they couldn't let others bully them all the time. He stared at the siblings and said in a deep voice, "If you have a habit of eating shit, you can show it to me." Hearing this, Major Zhou Yu's face darkened. This time, the brother and sister came to Lin Hai mainly to see if there was an opportunity to arrange a chance encounter with that important person and re-establish the friendly relationship they had in the past. Originally, they wanted to keep a low profile, but they didn't expect that they would meet a tough opponent today. It was just that these people had always looked down on ordinary people, not to mention that he had always doted on this proud and arrogant sister of his. Zhou Yu's face instantly darkened. The bodyguard-like people around him became even more gloomy, like dark clouds that were full of rain on a cloudy day. They took out pistols from their arms and pointed them at Su Li's head. 4 pistols were pointed at Su Li's head, and the triggers could be pulled at any time. This scene shocked everyone present, especially the escorts from the nightclub. After all, this was the capital ring's S1 Lin Hai State. The scene of guns being drawn in public was extremely shocking. Su Lu looked at the 4 black barrels pointed at his head. Of course, he was scared because he realized that these powerful people on the capital planet didn't seem to take human life seriously. They might actually dare to shoot. His face was slightly pale, but a bitter smile appeared on his lips. In the past 6 months, this was the 3rd time someone had pointed a gun at his head. Could it be that his fate was destined to not be able to escape from these tragic things? I don't know who you are, but as I said before, you must be people of status. The Federation is a society ruled by law. How bad is the impact of pulling out a gun in public? Will the elders in your family allow you to do this? Su clenched his fists tightly and didn't dare to move as he spoke to the man in the green suit. This sentence was exactly what Zhou was thinking, but this major wasn't prepared to change his way of doing things. This was because at certain times, especially in front of unfamiliar people, their reputation was the most important. Reputation often represented power or influence. Hook retreated to the Zhou sibling's side and frowned at the scene before him while rubbing his aching armpit. On the other side, the student from Yue University, the son of a Lin High State senator, seemed to want to say something, but he was scared by the guns and kept quiet. At this moment, it seemed that no one could save Su Lu, or rather, no one could change Shi Qinghai's fate of eating shit. Zhou was the woman in the red trench coat. Her hair was soft and wavy as it draped over her shoulders, but her personality wasn't soft at all. Looking at the pale-faced Su Lu, her heart flashed with a trace of perverted pleasure. She admired this young man's stubbornness to not admit defeat. So she liked this kind of Donglin stone to show a frightened expression under the muzzle of a gun. She looked at Su Lu with disdain, tightened her trench coat, and said mockingly, "What era is it now? You still want to live by relying on your fists? I like you. Kneel down and kowtow, and I'll let it go. But that drunkard won't be let off so easily." When she said this, Hook's expression changed, but he didn't say anything. Su Lu pursed his lips tightly and squinted his eyes at the siblings outside of the gun's line of sight, as if he wanted to remember their faces clearly. Under such circumstances, an ordinary person like him had no other choice. Even if he released the tremors in his body, how could he dodge a bullet? The Federation strictly controlled firearms. Who would have thought that the people around the siblings would carry guns, and even dare to take them out in public like this? "I won't kneel because I didn't do anything wrong, and you aren't my parents." Su Lu narrowed his eyes and stared at the man in the green suit who was in control of everything. He said, "Unless you beat me to the ground, or you can try to kill me with a single shot." This was a gamble. He was betting that these people with status wouldn't be willing to get into trouble because of a nobody like him. Zhou looked coldly at the stubborn Su Lu. He didn't know why this person was so scared, but he still insisted on stubbornly holding on. Donglin's rock. He really lived up to his name. A fist landed heavily on Su Li's abdomen, and the pain almost made him vomit out the food in his stomach. Since he would only kneel after being beaten to the ground, the people around the Zhou siblings naturally wouldn't be polite. They threw punches and kicks at Su Li's body. Anyway, under the threat of the gun, this guy with the Donglin accent didn't dare to resist. In just a short period of time, Su Li's body was injured a lot. No matter how strong his resistance was, it wasn't easy to stand still and be beaten. There was a dull pain in the right side of his chest. He didn't know if it was because his ribs were broken or because there was a small crack on the surface. Zhou, wearing a red windbreaker, looked at the scene with appreciation. The harder the beating, the more the resentment in her heart would be vented. Her charming and cold face gradually emitted a happy glow. "I only said that you put on too much perfume. Do you have to be so cruel?" An uninvited hand rested on Miss Zhou family's shoulder and patted her face very intimately. However, it seemed to be a little too hard, leaving a red mark on her cheek. Zhou screamed in shock, but didn't realize what had happened. On the other hand, the people around them, especially the soldiers she and her brother brought, reacted quickly. In the first moment, the 4 barrels that were originally pointed at Su Lu changed direction and aimed at her. After Zhou screamed, she immediately stopped talking and turned around. Then, she saw a face that was so beautiful that it didn't look like a man's when these privileged people in the Federation were beating Su Lu. No one noticed the mud on the ground, because the focus of the matter had already shifted. Shi Qinghai, who had drunk too much, was awakened by the cold ground, or by the pain of Su Li's fall. He staggered behind the woman in red and put his hand on her shoulder like a hooligan. There were many people watching the scene, and Zhou happened to be at the edge of the crowd. No one would have thought that the drunkard on the ground would silently sneak behind her and hold her shoulder. Shi Qinghai was hugging Zhou like a lover at this time, intimately and lightly patting her face. Perhaps he was still drunk, so his words were a little unclear. "Damn, this little girl has a bad temper. How dare you touch my friend?" One slap after another fell on Zhou's face, but it fell on everyone's heart. Everyone looked at this scene dumbfoundedly, wondering how regretful this beautiful young man would be when he woke up. Zoyu had never felt so humiliated in her life. The increasingly heavy pats gradually developed into slaps, and the words of the man holding her, mixed with the stench of alcohol, entered her ears. Her face instantly turned red, not knowing whether it was because of Shi Qinghai's slaps or because she was angry. She looked at the bodyguards in front of her, who were pointing guns at her, and screamed, "Kill him! Kill him!" No one dared to do anything, even her own brother, who just looked in this direction indifferently, watching the increasingly heavy palms falling on his sister's face. This was because they realized that the drunkard holding the little girl of the Zhou family seemed to have lost his mind. His entire weight was placed on Zhou Yu's delicate body. The worst thing was that the drunkard's half-unbuttoned suit revealed a small leather accessory, which everyone was very familiar with. It was a holster. Major Zhou Yu's eyes were extremely cold. He looked at the drunkard holding his sister hostage and said, "I'm Zhou Yu, the staff officer of the 3rd Military Region's Operations Department. May I ask who you are?" Chapter 56. Shi Qinghai ignored the guy with the onion in his nose. He looked at Sulu drunkenly and asked, "Are you okay?" Sulu shook his head and looked at the familiar yet strange face. He suddenly shouted, "Are you fucking drunk or sober?" Shi Qinghai was really drunk, at least in the beginning. As for how much he had sobered up, no one knew. However, everyone knew that a drunk man with a gun did not have much rationality. None of the people surrounding the two of them dared to take the risk. Zoyu opened his mouth to ask, but Shi Qinghai ignored him. This humiliation, combined with the palm that landed on Zoyu's face, made everyone's expression turn extremely ugly. "Let her go, or you'll regret it when you wake up." Zoyu controlled his emotions and said calmly. This kind of threat was actually not a good one, but facing a drunk man with a gun, he didn't have any good ideas. First, he had to solve the current situation and ensure his sister's safety. "You want me to eat shit? You want my brother to kneel?" Shi Qinghai still didn't pay attention to him. His body reeked of alcohol as he hugged the trembling red-clothed woman. He stopped slapping her cheeks and said, "You foreigners are really used to running amok. You actually came to Linhai to put on airs. I told you that you didn't want to admit defeat after using too much perfume. Except for the women in the 13 Avenues who use DVC like you do, who else would use it like you do?" The 13 Avenues was a famous street for high-class prostitutes in the special administrative region of the capital. It was said that the president's aides and officials of various ministries and commissions liked to hang out there. Shi Qinghai's words were extremely vicious, comparing the Zhou family's miss to a high-class prostitute. Sulu, who was wiping the blood, only noticed that Shi Qinghai had changed from calling him a friend to a brother. His arms slightly stiffened. "Tell me your name. It's not good to bully a woman." Zoyu's eyes twitched, but he still said calmly, "You have to solve this problem. If you let the government handle it, I believe you'll suffer more. All my life, I only know how to bully women." After drinking, Shi Qinghai was even more like a hooligan than usual. He stretched his neck and rolled his eyes, as if it was the first time he heard that person speak. He immediately spat. "What? Are you going to bite me?" Zoyu was so angry that he laughed and praised. "Very good, very good." At this moment, Hook, who had been silent all this while, suddenly spoke. "You're Shi Qinghai?" "He's one rank lower than me, but he was a famous figure in the academy back then. Everyone, from the principal to the teachers, liked him very much. Now that he had graduated so many years ago, he should be doing well in Linhai. As for which bureau, I'm not too sure." Hook recognized Shi Qinghai, who had graduated from the same school as Zoyu. He whispered in Zoyu's ear, "When we were in school, no one was willing to provoke him. No matter if it was in terms of fighting, marksmanship, or mental strength, not many people were his match. Fortunately, this person doesn't have any background, so he won't cause too much trouble." Hearing this, Zoyu calmed down. He looked coldly at Shi Qinghai, who was behind his sister and had a score in his heart. A top student from the academy, no matter how drunk he was still rational. This made his biggest worry disappear. He looked at Shi Qinghai and smiled. Let go. I'll count to 3. If you don't, my people will shoot. Maybe they won't shoot you, but maybe they'll shoot your stone-like friend, brother. Well, I'm sure the brother you're talking about won't be so cheap. Besides, I believe in your judgment after you're drunk. You should be able to guess who we are, and you should know our abilities. Hurting us is something you don't dare to do, because you know how terrible the consequences will be. After saying this, Major Zhou saw the worry in Shi Qinghai's blurred eyes. He knew that he had made the right bet. No matter how drunk this drunkard was, he still had some rationality. I'm Shi Qinghai, the head of Section 4 of the Linhai Field Office of the Federation's Investigation Bureau. Shi Qinghai's voice was dry because of the alcohol. He stared at the man, and a work permit appeared in his hand, next to the woman's cheek like magic. Major Zhou smiled even more happily. First of all, his opponent was gradually sobering up. More importantly, he was just a small head of the Federation's Investigation Bureau, so he had no reason to back down. At this time, he ignored the previous humiliation and counted with a smile. 1, 2. After sobering up, Mr. Shi naturally didn't dare to take out his gun and kill the brother and sister. Even though he was an official of the Federation's Investigation Bureau, he was still not strong enough to face these privileged people. In front of him, there seemed to be no other way but to let go of the woman in his arms. At the entrance of the 13 nightclub, everyone was waiting for this beautiful young official to surrender, except for Su Lu, who was on the other side. The response to these confident people was the sound of a gunshot. The gunshot was just before Major Zhou said the last 3 words. No one saw how the standard police gun in the holster of his suit appeared in Shi Qinghai's hand. His hand holding the gun seemed to be trembling. Under the muzzle of the gun, a military bodyguard of the Zhou family was shot in the thigh and fell to the ground. Did this person shoot? Everyone couldn't believe their eyes. They knew that the other party was a person with a very strong background, but this small head of the Federation's Investigation Bureau actually shot first, and he shot so decisively, leaving no way out, showing his tyranny and arrogance. The scene was in chaos. The other 3 military bodyguards with guns were shocked. They wanted to shoot back, but they were afraid that their young lady would be hurt. In this panic, Shi Qinghai took back his hand holding the gun and put it on Zhou's shoulder. He tilted his head and looked at Major Zhou's face with great interest. At this time, the young lady of the Zhou family was so scared that she didn't dare to open her mouth or move. Only Shi Qinghai's hoarse voice could be heard. Do you need to count when you shoot? Do you think you're setting off firecrackers in the snow? Shi Qinghai looked at the major's face and said sarcastically, I admire you. I've told you that I'm an official of the Federation's Investigation Bureau, and I even showed you my ID. How dare you point your gun at me? Assaulting a police officer. What is this if not assaulting a police officer? Harsh words seemed to come out of his mouth endlessly. The siren of a police car came from the distance. Major Zhou stared into his eyes and said, You shot an active duty soldier on the street. You're going to jail. I didn't see any active duty soldier. At this time, Shi Qinghai had sobered up a lot. He looked at the other person and said with a hiccup, You call yourself the staff officer of the operations department of the 3rd Military Region, but you're too pig head. You didn't even show your ID. I can't find the camera in Chang San'er's room, but maybe you don't know that there are 17 cameras in our field office. As long as you don't kill me tonight, I can find them. The Federation's electronic surveillance network was divided into 3 levels. The top level was the central charter, which was responsible for collecting signals from human chips, and the rest of the cameras belonged to different government departments. Chang San'er, who Shi Qinghai was talking about, was the boss behind the 13 nightclub. He saw that Zhou seemed to be kind, but in fact, he was extremely mean, so he reminded him. Zhou's face was very dark. He didn't expect to encounter such a difficult person and be humiliated like this in Linhai. Now the situation had been completely reversed. Since the other person dared to shoot, what could he do? The other person's cold-bloodedness and decisiveness when shooting made him realize that this person was not easy to deal with. He took a deep breath, looked at the unfamiliar night sky of Linhai, and then stared at Shi Qinghai and said word by word, I can assure you that you're finished. Finished is a matter for the future. At least I'm satisfied tonight. Shi Qinghai tilted his head and found Sulu. He shouted, "Hey, why are you still standing there? Hurry up and come here. We have to go to the police station to record a statement." Sulu looked much worse than Mr. Shi. His short-sleeved shirt had been torn into pieces, and his face was covered with bruises and dust. He looked like a refugee. He moved closer to Shi Qinghai. When he brushed past the major, who had been suppressing his killing intent, he suddenly heard the other person's cold voice ring in his ears. "And you, Dong Linstone, you're finished too." Major Zhou looked at him coldly and said, "You have a gun to protect you today. Wait until I bend that gun, then I'll come back and kill you. I want to know who else can help you." Sulu didn't look at him at all. He just lowered his head and wiped his sweat and blood as he walked over. When he heard this cold and disdainful threat, he suddenly felt a pain in his bones. It seemed that his ribs had been cracked earlier. The pain made him extremely angry, and he successfully changed from a country bumpkin pretending to be autistic to an angry bull that had barged into the city. He turned around, looked at the noble major in front of him, and asked seriously, "I have a few questions. First, now that your crazy sister is caught by my brother, you don't dare to shoot me because you found that my brother is crazier than her, right? Second, since you don't dare to shoot me, then none of you can beat me, right? Third, no matter how much I beg you, you won't let me go. There's no such thing as face between us, and there's no such thing as falling out. You'll kill me one day, right? Fourth, since you don't dare to kill me now, and you can't beat me with your fists, and you'll definitely kill me in the future, and you're still threatening me so stupidly, isn't that telling me that I have to take this rare opportunity to beat you up?" After saying these 4 sentences, Sulu, who had found the absolute reason, punched Major Zhou in the nose. His punch made Major Zhou's face look as wonderful as a cocktail. It was the Bloody Mary type. Chapter 57. The Linhai Police Headquarters Temporary Detention Center was set up in the police headquarters building. Chip scans, electronic keys, internal fingerprint verification, and layers upon layers of protective measures made the building seem particularly secure. Anyone who had any ideas about the building would lose their ideas as soon as they entered the building. The people locked in the temporary detention center would never be able to escape. Of course, the 2 young men who were caught here tonight definitely had no intention of escaping. How did Mr. Shi get caught? A policeman who had finished patrolling threw his key card on the table and made himself a cup of tea. He looked at his colleague and asked with a gloating smile on his face. Although the police headquarters and the Federation Bureau of Investigation field office were not in the same system, they were both under the government structure. In order to solve cases, the 2 sides often had to cooperate. Shi Qinghai, the infamous rogue officer of the Federation Bureau of Investigation, was also quite famous in the police headquarters. However, there were elements of competition and rivalry between the 2 departments. So when the police put Shi Qinghai in the detention center today, these policemen were very happy. Shooting in the middle of the street. "I heard that the other party is a big shot with a strong background." The policeman sighed and said, "If you offend this kind of person, you'll be in trouble no matter how good the reason is. Even if the field office intervenes and doesn't let him go to court, at least he'll have to hand in his gun and resign." "Is it the wounded person that the director respectfully sent out just now? What's his background?" "I'm not sure, but I think he's from the 3 military regions." The policeman shrugged. He didn't like the people from the Federation Bureau of Investigation, but after all, they were a powerful organization that belonged to the Federation. Seeing Shi Qinghai locked in prison, he couldn't help but feel a little sad and angry. Who dares to offend these people? But it's strange, although Mr. Shi is always a rogue and can cause trouble when he's drunk, he doesn't seem to have a bad temper. Why did he dare to shoot in front of so many people? I heard this from Helens. He was probably influenced by his partner's bad temper and couldn't control himself after drinking. Another person came up to him and exclaimed, "It's the one who was locked up with Mr. Shi. He looks like an honest young man, but no one expected him to be so ruthless. Do you know? The 3rd Precinct's rapid response vehicle has already arrived at the scene. Mr. Shi is pointing his gun at the young lady. That seemingly honest young man actually beat up the people over there one by one. He's so ruthless. Beat him up in front of the police? How violent. The policeman shook his head. After drinking 24 times, I realized that I've been influenced by you too much. I've talked too much, and my temper has become irritable. Inside the cold iron fence, Sulu leaned against the fully sculpted wall and stared blankly at the ceiling. He sighed. It had been 4 hours since he and Shi Qinghai had been arrested by the police. Outside the window, he could vaguely see the light of dawn. However, no one had come to ask for any evidence. All these signs made him a little worried, and his eyes were a little blurred. He didn't know if it was because of Shi Qinghai's status as an official of the Federation's Investigation Bureau, but only the two of them were locked up in this temporary detention room. Shi Qinghai, who reeked of alcohol, leaned against the narrow single bed. Looking at Su Li's worried face, he couldn't help but laugh. Looks like you're quite ruthless. You don't look like the honest doorman at all. But why are you scared now? It's a waste not to beat him up. Anyway, because of you, I've offended a big shot that I can't afford to offend. Su Li's expression was a little bitter. He thought to himself, if I could leave the police station, would I have to start running again? But he had just settled down in Yue University, especially since there was knowledge that he liked here. He might come in contact with things that he hadn't come in contact with yet. The key was to have a stable life. It would be a pity if it was destroyed like this. Only a small part of the worry on his face was because he was worried about the threat of the major from the aristocratic family, but more of it was because his mood was a little complicated. Sulu lowered his head and gently rubbed the metal bracelet on his left wrist. Thinking about the chips inside, his mood gradually calmed down. At worst, he could just change his identity. The Federation was so big, there was nowhere he couldn't settle down. Don't worry about anything. Believe me, by tomorrow morning at the latest, no, it should be 8 o'clock today. The two of us can walk out of the police station openly. Shi Qinghai saw the worry between his eyebrows. He laughed and said in a hoarse voice, "Don't listen to that brat's bragging. Although the Federation government is like a pile of shit, it's not real shit. It's a society ruled by law. All the evidence is biased towards us. What can they do? If the people of the 3 military regions want to stretch their hands into Lin Hai, it won't be that convenient. If they walk in the open, they'll be more worried than us. After all, their identities are different. Do you think it's a good thing for a soldier to pull out a gun in a residential area?" Sulu knew very well about things related to political power. He subconsciously believed Mr. Shi's judgment, but he still wasn't sure. He asked doubtfully, "So this matter is left unsettled? I don't believe it. What's the major's surname? What's his background?" You have to believe it even if you don't believe it. When these young masters do things, they can either suppress us on the spot. Once this matter is brought to the court, they can only shut up. If this matter is brought to court, how can their parents show their face? Shi Qinghai said with disdain, "Major Zhou of the Operations Department of the 3 military regions is really something. I don't believe that his father, who has a fat job in the Ministry of National Defense, will really let him do whatever he wants." "You know a lot." Sulu praised him sincerely. "Of course. I'm a general of the Federation Investigation Bureau. What does the field office do? Isn't it spying on spies on the outside and officials on the inside?" Shi Qinghai raised his eyebrows. He was about to say something arrogant when he suddenly realized something was wrong. He stared at Sulu and said, "Wait, why do I feel like you're mocking me?" "Don't think so. It's just mocking." Sulu looked at the ceiling and said, "Aren't you supposed to be a guard for the government? How did you become the chief of the Federation Investigation Bureau? You know that the other party is not easy to mess with, but you still pretended to be drunk." No, you have to listen to my explanation. The Federation Investigation Bureau is supposed to be a guard for the government. It's not much different from your job with no future. As for pretending to be drunk, your words hurt our relationship. Shi Qinghai said very seriously, "I don't want to find out anything about you. Even if I wanted to test you, I wouldn't use this pair of bastard siblings as my arrows." "I don't have any secrets." Sulu finally got angry. After drinking for dozens of days and working with an outsider under the breath of life and death, he and Shi Qinghai could not be close. However, Shi Qinghai always looked at him mysteriously every time, and he was a little sensitive to the meaning hidden in his eyes. Nonsense. You're just a squat soldier. How could you beat up an expert from the military security office? Don't forget, that person is my senior, a graduate of the 1st Military Academy. Shi Qinghai looked at him mockingly and waved his hand. If you say you don't have any secrets, I won't believe it even if you kill me. But I'm too lazy to care. Today, I fired a shot in order to protect you. Even if the other party wants to deal with it secretly and not openly, I reckon I won't be able to keep my job. Brat, you don't feel sorry for me and tell me a good story. That's another matter. Sulu stared at him angrily and said, You have to understand. That crazy woman wanted to feed you shit, so I stopped her. How come I owe you a favor in the end? Besides, what does it have to do with me if you lose your job? Do you want me to introduce you to an hourly guard job? Shi Qinghai laughed and suddenly looked at him seriously. I know you're good at fighting, but the problem is that Zhou knows it too. Although this pair of brother and sister are not very powerful, they're more than enough to take care of us. On the surface, that narrow-minded major will definitely cover up what happened last night, but secretly, he won't let us go. I'm sure I'll be kicked out of the investigation bureau, and they won't let you go. Especially that stupid woman. Shi Qinghai sat up, shook his head and said, I did drag you down this time. You have to be more careful in the future. Speaking of which, although that stupid woman is tasteless, her white legs are quite tasty. Sulu was still very serious at the beginning, but when he heard Mr. Shi's boring words, he couldn't help but sigh. He shook his head and said, It's my bad luck to have met a jinx like you. I've thought about it. If those people really want to deal with me, I can't do anything about it. I'll just hide far away. Don't think too much about it. Just stay in school. The government is very strict with the university town, especially with the recent spread of Carlinism. No one dares to provoke those aggressive students at this time. Although you're a gatekeeper and auditing student, if you hide in Yue University, no matter how powerful you are, you can only wait outside for the time being. How powerful is the Zhou family? Sula had to figure out how powerful the people who wanted to kill him were. Suddenly, he thought of a little girl's clean face and asked curiously, 7 big families? 7 big families? Shi Qinghai lay down, crossed his legs and said mockingly, Why would that kind of people go to a place like 13? Why would they let people see how powerful they are? Only upstarts like the Zhou family would get involved with 2 hooligans like us. They don't think it's embarrassing. I'm not a hooligan, you are. Sulu felt that talking was too tiring. He turned over and faced the wall, smelling the faint smell of plastic. He closed his eyes to rest and think about the future. Looking at his bruised back, Shi Qinghai's peach blossom eyes flashed with sincerity and a bitter smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Today's development was a little out of his plan. Maybe he subconsciously wanted to test Sulu, but he really didn't expect that Sulu would dare to go against those people for him and even risk exposing his secret. Until now, he still didn't know Suli's secret, but he knew what his decision at that moment meant. It was also from that moment on that Mr. Shi felt that Sulu could really be a good friend. Thank you, Shi Qinghai said in a very low voice. You're welcome. It's what I should do. Sulu didn't turn his head and said, If it was some other innocent bystander who was dragged to eat shit, I wouldn't care, so you don't have to thank me. Shi Qinghai smiled and said, I understand. The 3 young men who serve the citizens promoted by the president's office are you. But you really won't tell me about your adventures? Chapter 58. Shi Qinghai was a very strange person. He didn't want to pry into other people's secrets, but he couldn't help but be curious. Maybe it was because of his stubbornness or the nature of his job. Well, since people like to hear about adventures, Sulu had no choice but to fabricate a completely new adventure. Otherwise, he really couldn't explain how he was able to defeat an expert from the army at the entrance of the nightclub. Thinking about this, Sulu had a headache. He realized that he still didn't have much experience in dealing with people. In order to explain something, he always had to tell more lies. Moreover, he also thought of a very troublesome problem, and that was the identity that the boss uncle arranged for him. Should he find some time to go to his hometown in the remote area of S1? The new adventure story was similar to the one he told to the fat guy on the ancient bell, but this time, Sulu was more cautious. He arranged for the fake class monitor to be a hidden master with a vague face. What's the class monitor's surname? Shi Qinghai obviously didn't believe him. He laughed and asked. Su Li's heart skipped a beat. A surname appeared in his mind, and he said, I think his surname is Li? Shi Qinghai didn't seem to care, but he seemed to have thought of something. He frowned and fell into deep thought. Shi Qinghai thought about this family name in his heart and did not dare to think in that direction. However, if what Su Lu said was true, it could explain everything. However, Shi Qinghai had not heard of any children of that family in Feiqing City wandering outside. Shi Qinghai looked at Su Li's back and shook his head. He somewhat believed in Su Li's bizarre experience. He smiled and thought to himself, I'm afraid this kid doesn't even know the background of the awesome person who taught him how to fight. Since he had a confirmed idea, satisfied his curiosity, and had some interesting things to think about, Shi Qinghai naturally changed the topic. Are you going to be a janitor in Yue University? The Department of National Defense's Office of Retired Soldiers can arrange a job. It's better than this. In his opinion, Su Lu, this young man, had a very outstanding character. Although he did not know what special skills he had in other aspects, with his fighting skills, it was not impossible for him to enter the security company under the police station, or even find some connections to enter the police system. I'm an auditor at Yue University. Su Lu turned around, looked at him and said, Anyway, I still have some spare money. Let's talk about it after I finish attending the classes for the next 2 years. Auditing students can't get a diploma. Shi Qinghai fished out a crumpled pack of cigarettes from his trousers pocket. He put one in his mouth and threw the other one at him. He said vaguely, You don't have a future. Do you know what you want to do in the future? Su Lu took the cigarette and lighter and lit it up. He took a deep breath and tried to puff out a few perfect smoke rings, just like how the boss used to do in the past. However, what he puffed out was the scattered steam from the humidifier. He coughed twice, looked at Shi Qinghai, and smiled. He thought to himself, this guy obviously doesn't know what he wants to do in the future, so why is he asking me? I used to want to be a battleship mechanic assistant, but I changed my mind. I want to get a mechanic's license and then find a job in a big manufacturing company in S1. No matter what position I get in the future, as long as I can do something I like, it's not bad. Su Lu looked at the dissipating smoke in front of him and said in a daze. This was one of his life goals, but when it came out of his mouth, it sounded ridiculous and unconfident. Ever since he was implanted with the disguised chip, perhaps his life was destined to not be so happy and peaceful. There was always a shadow in the young man's heart, a shadow that he did not want others to see. He wanted to find the real inside story of that incident, but with his current status and ability, not to mention uncovering the inside story of that uncle's death, even getting close to that black cloth was wishful thinking. Shi Qinghai saw the heaviness and sadness in his eyes. After a moment of silence, he suddenly said, Do your best to fulfill your life goals. If you need my help in the future, just let me know. The development of the situation was not out of Shi Qinghai's expectations. At around 7 o'clock in the morning, the Lin High Police Headquarters received a direct order from the higher-ups to open the door of the detention center and release the two of them. The police officers who were drinking coffee to refresh themselves joked with Shi Qinghai, and Shi Qinghai scolded them back. During this kind of conversation, Su Lu, who was quietly listening on the side, roughly understood what was going on. The Zhou family used their connections to forcefully suppress the conflict in front of the nightclub. The people of the 3rd Military Region had a conflict with the people of the Lin High Field Office, and they even pulled out guns. If this incident was used by someone with bad intentions, it would definitely involve the big boss in the Ministry of National Defense. The Zhou family would not let this happen, so they would rather deal with it in a low-key manner. Su Lu walked out of the police station. Facing the slightly cold morning breeze, he couldn't help but shake his head. The so-called Democratic and Free Federation Society was actually still so hierarchical. A Zhou family that wasn't very famous among the people could reach into the police system and suppress a vicious case, causing the shooting at the entrance of 13 to go up in smoke. Shi Qinghai drove Su Lu to the back gate of Yue University. He leaned against the car and looked at the few female students who were exercising in the morning. He stared at their tight-fitting sportswear and said in a very serious tone, "For the next few days, don't leave the school gate. Be careful." The Zhou family officially suppressed this incident. However, they were ruthlessly humiliated by two small fry. How could a young master and a young lady from such a family take this lying down? What followed closely was probably the other party's secret and merciless revenge. Shi Qinghai looked at him with some worry and said, "You don't have to worry about me. Even if I get expelled, I'm still an outstanding student from the same school. Those frighteningly high-ranking professors in the school can always protect me. I don't know why you had a conflict with that pair of siblings." When Su Lu was about to walk through the iron gate, he suddenly stopped. He turned around and said seriously, "Maybe you have your own motives, but that pair of siblings really aren't playthings. So I'll let it go this time. Don't do it again." Shi Qinghai held the cigarette in his mouth and tilted it down, like a leaf that had been hit by frost. His expression was calm, but his heart was somewhat moved. He thought to himself that his little brother's eyes were indeed sharp. He couldn't hide it from him. The spring of the 66th year of the constitutional era was hotter than the previous years. It was only the end of April, but it made people feel like the scorching summer was coming early. The integrated air conditioning system inside the buildings in Linhai had already been turned on, providing a wonderful cool air to those busy working. However, in the slightly hot twilight, on the rooftop of the tallest building in Linhai, two people were talking without fear of the high temperature or the heat. One of them was about 40 years old, with a serious face and a trace of majesty in his gentle eyes. The other person was sour and had a trace of residual alcohol smell. His wrinkled suit was even more annoying than the wrinkled cigarette in his mouth. The 005 series of electronic spy satellites from A to Z are constantly moving in the space 588 kilometers above our heads. Don't you think it's a bit stupid to always let me meet you in this place? The rooftop is indeed high. It's a 40-story building, so I'm not afraid of people seeing my face with binoculars. But the problem is, do you know how hot it is here? How cold is the winter? You don't allow me to take the elevator. How tiring is it to climb up the stairs? And how uncreative is this kind of meeting place? Shi Qinghai looked at the middle-aged man in front of him and said angrily. The eyes of the middle-aged man in his 40s did not shift in the slightest as he coldly stared at Shi Qinghai's face. He suddenly opened his mouth and said, "For the past 2 years, you have never complained. Now that you know you did something wrong, you want to seize the initiative to gain the psychological advantage? Give up this idea. Don't forget that I taught you psychology." Shi Qinghai laughed at himself. He put the cigarette in his mouth and took a puff. Looking back at the city at dusk, he felt that the city was becoming more and more like a monster. If he didn't escape, he was afraid that one day he would be eaten. "What happened last night?" The middle-aged man asked sternly. "Do you know how many connections the organization used to keep your position in the investigation bureau? And they couldn't let others know. The cost was 60% more than the budget." The cigarette in Shi Qinghai's mouth trembled slightly. He didn't turn around. When he heard that he wasn't fired, there was a trace of sadness and disappointment in his charming eyes. When he turned around, the emotions in his eyes were all gone. He said calmly, "The Zhou family and the Crown Prince used to have a good relationship. They came to Linhai this time to see the Crown Prince. Since my goal was to prevent the Ministry of National Defense from establishing a good relationship with the Crown Prince, last night's action was naturally for this purpose. So don't blame me." The supreme leader of the Federation was the president. The passage of relevant budget bills was handled by more than 300 members of the management committee, and the adjudication of cases was handled by the court system. The imperial system that appeared occasionally in the long history of the Federation had ended 37 constitutional years ago. Of course, there was no emperor in this society. Of course, there was no such thing as a crown prince. The crown prince that Shi Qinghai and the middle-aged man were talking about was obviously a code name. Of course, they couldn't be talking about the crown prince of the empire. It was said that the current emperor of the distant interstellar empire only had one daughter. But what kind of person could make the Zhou family travel thousands of miles to Linhai just to see him? What kind of person could be called the crown prince by Shi Qinghai? The middle-aged man lowered his head and thought for a moment. He seemed to accept Shi Qinghai's explanation. Suddenly, he said, "Who is that guy called Sulu? What's your purpose for getting close to him? Do you need to put it on record?" Shi Qinghai frowned slightly and spat out the cigarette in his mouth. The red butt of the cigarette splashed out sparks on the ground. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the middle-aged man. He said seriously, "That's my personal friend. I'm warning you." Shi Qinghai's warning seemed to have worked. The middle-aged man didn't continue to ask this question, but his tone became very strict. "Many years ago, when you were willing to join this great cause, you had already made a promise. You don't have the right to have friends, and you can't have friends. At that time, I didn't understand friendship." Shi Qinghai didn't care about him and answered indifferently. The middle-aged man looked at him quietly. Suddenly, he asked, "When you opened fire last night, did you want to quit the Federation Investigation Bureau? I know you've been working hard these past few years, and you've been passively resisting the orders of the organization for the past 2 years. But don't forget, the future of the Federation requires you young people to fight and work hard for it." Shi Qinghai was silent for a long time. Then, he said in a low voice, "Yes, Director." Chapter 59. The middle-aged man, who Shi Qinghai addressed as the director, said after a moment of silence, "Your judgment of the situation is correct. Zhongxing has already called his children back to the capital special district. They won't be back anytime soon. Their family knows the identity of the crown prince by chance, so they definitely don't want to leave a bad impression on the crown prince. They should be disinfected in the next few days. That crown prince is really ridiculous. There are so many heavily guarded private academies in the capital special district. Why did he have to come to Linhai?" Shi Qinghai lit another cigarette. Thinking about the final target of this operation, he couldn't help but feel a little worried. The crown prince was really a high and mighty figure, not someone the Zhou family could compare with. It wasn't difficult to stop the Ministry of Defense from showing goodwill to him, and it might be possible to stop the influence of the Hawks, but it was really too difficult to get close to him. "I only know that he's in the university town. Which one is it?" Shi Qinghai lowered his head and smoked. He subconsciously kicked the wall behind him, shaking off the dust on his leather shoes. "I don't know how many blockades there will be around such a person. Even if I can arrange some kind of coincidence, I don't know how old he is, what his temperament is, where he lives, what his route is. How can I get close to him? I don't even know what the crown prince looks like." The latest information came back. He's between 17 and 19 years old, because his family hasn't held a coming-of-age ceremony for him yet. The director said seriously, "Don't even think about three-dimensional imaging. There's not even a picture of him in the outside world. At most, there's a portrait that can be taken orally, but it's very distorted. So whether you can find him, get close to him, and gain his favor all depends on your personal ability." Shi Qinghai spat a mouthful of saliva on the ground. He felt a chill in his chest. The conflict with the Zhou family last night was indeed deliberately provoked by him. It wasn't difficult to find out the personality of the woman named Zhou Yu, and her preference for DVC perfume. The reason why he brought Sulu along was that he wanted to do a better job. He was prepared to save Sulu during the conflict. This was more in line with the characteristics of his character that he left in the Investigation Bureau and the organization. Only then could he hide his true thoughts. He was very tired. For the past 2 years, he had been playing the role of a playboy. No, a real playboy. He did not want to be promoted in the Investigation Bureau because it was very difficult for him to be caught in this gap. He wanted to take this opportunity to be directly fired by the Investigation Bureau of the Federation. This way, he believed that the organization would not value him as much as before. Perhaps he would be able to have a more free life. However, he did not expect that Sulu, that brat, would actually take the initiative to stand up for him. Moreover, he had an ability that was beyond his imagination. He did not expect that the organization would value him so much that they would not hesitate to mobilize the hidden forces in the government to fight against the Zhou family and protect his position. Shi Qinghai held the cigarette, but between his middle finger and index finger, and fell into silence. He knew that he had to complete this mission. However, The target that had never appeared in the public, I was really not easy to approach. We all know that it is very difficult. The senator also knows that. He even said that there is no way to get in touch with him. The middle-aged director looked at him and said gently, "But as long as there is a glimmer of hope, you have to fight for it. I know that I am not qualified to know what kind of role this prince is, but I really don't understand. After all, the Federation is an election-based society. How can one person have such a strong influence?" Election? The Federation has held countless elections over the years. However, in the eyes of the people who really know the inside story, the results of each election have long been predetermined. The middle-aged director's eyes flashed with deep disappointment towards the Federation's political environment. Next year, there will be another presidential election. What do you think? The current president is a muddle-headed person. I hope the next one will be better. Shi Qinghai shrugged. I never vote, but I may vote for Mr. Pabre next year. It is not certain whether Pabre will participate in the election. The middle-aged director was obviously not surprised by Shi Qinghai's choice. This was because people like him had a good impression of this lawyer who had been born in the lower class of society. He said slightly worriedly, even if he participates in the election, so what? If those families don't recognize him, the financial groups under their control, the politicians, the media, and the omnipresent influence will be enough to knock him down in the primary election. If Pabre wins the respect and recognition of those families, then he will have to make concessions in terms of his political program. If so, will Pabre still be the current Pabre? Shi Qinghai did not speak. He knew what his boss said was true, but he still wanted to keep his naive thoughts. He hoped that after Mr. Pabre became the president, he would still dare to face the injustice of society head-on and use a firm and gentle attitude to firmly carry out reforms. Mr. Pabre obtained his Federation lawyer's license from Donglin. Shi Qinghai suddenly said, "The people I know from Donglin are as stubborn as rocks. I believe he is the same." The sky was getting darker, and the wind on the rooftop was getting stronger. The night breeze at the end of April finally dispelled the heat of the day. Shi Qinghai buttoned up his suit and said goodbye to the middle-aged man. For people like them, such a long chat was an extremely luxurious thing, even if it was about politics. When you have the chance, get me some wild rabbit meat. I won't count on you for something as good as wild beef. Shi Qinghai flicked the cigarette, but to the corner of the wall and left without looking back. He waved his hand and said, "After all, you are the director of HDD, aren't you?" The image on the gray monitor seemed to have come to a standstill. For a long time, no one passed by, and there was no movement. If it weren't for the pear trees swaying in the spring breeze, people would have suspected that the monitor was broken. Sulu sat in the bungalow next to the iron gate. He glanced at the monitor from the corner of his eyes, and then looked through the large, transparent glass at the quiet street outside the university. He didn't see anyone suspicious, so he was slightly relieved. It seemed that the revenge of those big shots would not come so soon. When he returned to UA University in the morning, Sulu deliberately strolled around the 4 most famous fountains on campus. He listened to the speeches and slogans, and confirmed that Shi Qinghai was right. Although not many students were attracted by the speeches and were still focused on their homework, the atmosphere in the university was still a little tense. Sulu listened for a long time with curiosity. Only then did he find out that the annual George Carlin Day was coming. The Education Department of the Federation government and the Investigation Department of the Federation were very vigilant, afraid that some kind of spark would burn into the university. Under such circumstances, no matter how arrogant the Zhou family siblings were, they wouldn't have the guts to barge into UA University to deal with him. Otherwise, if they caused some kind of trouble, no one would be able to bear the consequences. Sula had no interest in politics. After searching the internet, he had a preliminary understanding of the somewhat familiar name George Carlin. This person named George Carlin was once a genius professor at the Capital University of the Federation. He was also one of the youngest professors in recorded history. His field of expertise was political history. This somewhat awkward name was actually a study of the different political forms that had appeared in history. George Carlin was never a radical scholar in front of the public. In his works, even anarchism and absolute liberalism were rarely seen. He only used a very rigorous attitude to analyze the various political structures in human history and reconstructed the model. He analyzed why the last imperial society of human society collapsed before the 37 constitutional years ago, and why the royal family at that time chose to politely and peacefully retreat. At the same time, he also analyzed the federation system that had just had a stable structure for 600 years. He believed that this system was a false separation of three powers. In a situation where information couldn't be completely shared, the possession of information was an extremely unfair distribution of production resources. This would lead to the unfair distribution of social resources and then a series of social problems. George Carlin pointed out that the legendary 7 great families were abnormal existences under this system. The objective was purely academic research. When the research of history was gradually extended to the research of reality, it was easy for problems to arise. Perhaps George Carlin himself did not realize that the theories he put forward, especially the detailed material analysis and data calculation, gave those who were dissatisfied with the status quo a powerful weapon. From the memories of some of the later generations, this person named George Carlin was just a very simple scholar. In the beginning, his name was only respected in the academic circle. Ordinary citizens of the Federation weren't willing to look at those incomparably boring lists of numbers. They only wanted to see the conclusion. Therefore, George Carlin's influence wasn't displayed much. The Federation still peacefully and naturally allowed him to publish his academic works. However, all of this changed in the 36th constitutional year, because on the 19th of May of that year, George Carlin was invited to attend a meeting of a certain government department. Midway, he mysteriously disappeared, and since then, no trace of him could be found. George Carlin disappeared for 30 years. Gradually, some people took notice of his works, and even more so of his mysterious disappearance. A story with a hint of conspiracy was enough to attract the attention of countless ordinary people. This was especially so for the anti-government side, who had just disbanded their army and given up on violent resistance. They seized this opportunity and adopted George Carlin's theory as their political program. Under the slogan of eliminating the injustice of the Federation society, demanding greater transparency, and investigating the insider trading of the 7 great families, they participated in the parliamentary election of the administrative planet S2. From then on, George Carlin was given more color. The pioneer who exposed the dark secrets of the Federation, the courageous scholar, and the like were unknown. Every year, the 19th of May was designated as George Carlin Day. What was absurd was that this bill was actually proposed and passed by the members of the Federation Management Committee. The members of the Federation claimed that they were all believers of George Carlin, while the anti-government members were just scum who used George Carlin's theory. The members insisted that they had nothing to do with the 7 great families. As a result, the citizens of the Federation were somewhat dumbfounded. Could it be that the 7 great families didn't exist in the first place? This person who was revered as St. George was really pitiful. Perhaps he was just too lost in thought and drove into the river. He was just an honest scholar, so how did he end up like this? Sully's gaze moved to the bottom of the screen. He wasn't interested in politics, and he didn't have a trace of goodwill toward the Federation government. As a result, he actually felt some sympathy for George Carlin. He suddenly noticed an interesting anecdote about George Carlin. He couldn't help but widen his eyes. Why was this argument so familiar? Chapter 60. After George Carlin walked up to the altar, all of the content of his lectures at Capital University, even his casual conversations, were collected by his worshippers and uploaded onto the internet. This historical and political scientist was clearly not a pedantic person who only knew how to read books. Instead, he had a wide range of interests and had dabbled in the field of art. However, his achievements in these fields were not as high as his achievements in his field. Even this scholar could not shake off his male hobbies. He often liked to comment on the late Second Great War between the Federation and the Empire when he was half-drunk. He had many comments on war, but unfortunately, even his most loyal worshippers had to admit that this gentleman really did not know anything about war. Most of his comments were absurd, often far from the development of reality. In particular, His comments on mecha were hilarious to countless people. Although individual mecha are extremely mobile, the amount of energy and ammunition they can carry is seriously insufficient. They are categorized as high-energy, low-energy weapons, definitely not in line with economic principles and political needs. In modern warfare, if individual mecha are said to be beautiful and expensive diamonds, then any of the most primitive group cannons would be able to burn these diamonds into black charcoal. This conversation had taken place at a university cocktail party in the spring of the 27th year of the constitutional calendar and later became one of St. George's anecdotes. Sulu had also seen this passage. He scratched his head curiously, feeling that this passage was unbelievably familiar. After thinking for a long time, he remembered that in the endless twilight outside the mine, whenever he showed a yearning for mecha, Uncle Feng, you would say this passage in an incomparably mocking tone. Uncle actually reads George Carlin's quotes? Sulu recalled that white-haired fellow with a mouthful of rotten teeth. No matter how he thought about it, the other did not seem like someone interested in history, politics, or political gossip. He could not help but laugh. Tossing the matter of George Carlin to the back of his mind, Sulu continued his night tour of the internet. With great familiarity, he entered a certain forum and began to carefully read the documents on the 300th entry. This was a propaganda forum about the spirit of the First Charter. There was everything on the First Charter. By now, Sulu had already shaken off the panic of fleeing. The camouflage chip behind his neck seemed to be able to completely evade the brilliance of the First Charter. However, he was still a little worried and wanted to know more about the First Charter. He had been working on the project since 2 months ago. After browsing the network of the Capital Ring for a long time, he was shocked to discover that the files about the Bureau of Proclamation, the electronic surveillance network of the Federation, and the central computer were all openly available on the network and in the library for the citizens of the Federation to read. The working procedures of the Bureau of Proclamation and the authority of the central computer were not secrets. Perhaps only the absolute transparency of this process could allow the citizens of the Federation to accept the existence of the First Charter. Sulu would sometimes think like this in his heart. The more he knew, the less he didn't know, and the less fear he had. He stopped searching through the documents and stared at the metal bracelet on his wrist, deep in thought. The ability to create the camouflage chip was enough to defeat all the Nebula Award winners in the past 100 years. Who exactly was the boss? Why did he know so much about the Bureau of Proclamation and the central computer that gathered the crystallization of human wisdom? There was no need to continue thinking about questions that could not be answered. Gently stroking the smooth and textured surface of the metal bracelet, Sulu's finger gently tapped on the holographic screen and connected to the government bulletin board. After rummaging under the information tree for a long time, he finally found the information about the third prison in the East Forest region, Foggy State. Brother Wei will be released from prison in a week. Sulu looked at the familiar name on the bulletin board and felt inexplicably sad. He had very few friends in his life. Brother Wei and Changzi were two, and Shi Qinghai, who he had just met recently, could barely be considered one. Of course, the boss was one. Xiao Chong, who was not yet 14 years old, was sent to the juvenile detention center. He wondered how anxious his mother would be. What about Li Wei? What could he do after he was released from prison? Would he really become a gangster when he returned to Zhonglo Street? Sulu felt anxious. He lowered his head and thought for a long time. The smile on his face that rarely disappeared at this time. He finally made up his mind and began to look for reliable ways on the internet, hoping to find a way to send a sum of money to Li Wei. The bank card that Feng Yu left him still had more than 3 million Federation coins. This was something he found out after downloading the Sanlin United Bank app a few days ago. He planned to send 1 million to Li Wei, believing that this could help Li Wei embark on a completely different path. From a rational point of view, Sulu knew that his actions were not wise. If the Federation suspected something in the future, it would be very easy to find out from Li Wei through the financial monitoring system. However, Sulu just could not watch his friend suffer in a distant place, not to mention that Li Wei was imprisoned because of him. In his opinion, there were many things in this world that were more important. Of course, he would be extremely careful and try not to leave any clues, thinking of his boss, thinking of Li Wei, thinking of his hometown. Sulu felt frustrated. After a moment of daze, He took out the name card made of pure natural fiber from his pocket. After glancing at it, he put it away in the metal drawer. He thought of the cute little girl on the spaceship. This name card was given to him by Madame Zhou. Once he thought of the distant and terrifying existence of the 7 great families, Su Li's mood became a little strange. His boss had died at the hands of the 4th Military Region, and quite a few of Silin's soldiers knew what he looked like. If there wasn't a major change in his life, then he would never have dialed the number on the business card. He probably wouldn't have met that little girl again in this life, unless he had a death wish. If there was a day when he really needed to call that number, then it could only mean that in his life, there was already a problem that was more terrifying than death. Yue University's West Gate, which had been sealed for decades, was reopened a few days ago. Due to the shorter distance, the students chose to leave the university through the West Gate. Originally, not many people used the back gate, but now, it was even more deserted. It was possible that not a single person would appear for several hours. Only the pear trees accompanied the lonely teenager in the gatehouse. At this time, it was already late at night, and the spring wind quietly subsided. Su Lu walked to the middle of the iron gate under the shadow of the pear trees. After locking the iron gate, he returned to his room and swiped his card. Only then did he turn off all the lights, turn on the automatic monitoring device, and walk back to his bedroom. In the darkness, Su Lu, who was wearing only a single piece of underwear, did the horse stance for half an hour. He wiped the sweat off his forehead and started revising the 10 stiff mechanical movements. Every time he entered his knee, raised his elbow, and turned his wrist, they were all so forceful and powerful. There was no turning back, and there was no other way to describe it. In the end, he took a shower. Facing the mirror, he used a small knife to scrape between his eyebrows for a long time. Only then did he carry his aching and tired body to bed and fall into a deep sleep. In his sleep, in the darkness, he did not notice that there was an extremely difficult to detect wave on his naked body. It was moving along a certain path, turning back, and finally circling back to its original point, forming a passage, and then continuing. These waves and tremors became clearer and clearer, but also more and more inconspicuous. It was as if they were about to hide under his skin, into his muscles and joints, never to be seen by others again. Life in Yue University was unchanging. Every day, Su Lu would sit in on class and absorb the knowledge that was digitized and turned into blueprints. That was the most basic knowledge, but also the part that he lacked the most. For years of working as a mechanic had made his practical ability abnormally strong. However, for some reason, the mechanic, Feng Yu, had never taught him any theoretical knowledge. Today, Su Lu was in an awkward situation. He knew how to do it, but he did not know why. Yue University's professors' dry theoretical lectures just so happened to satisfy his needs in this aspect. Therefore, he lived an abnormally fulfilling life. He only had to wait for the next semester's experimental class to begin, to verify the results of his combination of theory and practice. He did not know what Shi Qinghai had been busy with recently. He only came over to say hello one afternoon and then disappeared. Su Lu knew that this rogue official had not been fired. He could not help but be surprised at his ability. He knew how busy the Federation Investigation Bureau was, but he did not complain about missing a few drinks. However, for some reason, Su Lu was not used to not seeing that guy for a few days. The revenge that the two of them had been worried about, the revenge of that pair of cold-blooded siblings, did not come as expected. However, Su Lu still cautiously stayed within the campus, not taking a single step out of the iron gate. If this peaceful life continued, Su Lu would definitely be very satisfied. He had already bought a summer ticket to the hometown, recorded in the chip to take a look. He seemed to have gotten used to his fake identity and did not want to be disturbed by other things. However, on that day, Su Lu felt that the campus's atmosphere was a little strange. The students walking between the school's experimental building and the dormitory had a normal expression, but Su Lu felt that something was about to happen. Perhaps it was because the principal suddenly appeared in the deserted back door to talk to him. Su Lu lowered his head and tried his best to remain calm. Although Yue University was not famous, it seemed to have a high position within the government. This seemingly ordinary principal's position was definitely not low. Why would such a person specifically come to the front door to talk to him? At this time, Sulu had already forgotten about the recommendation letter. He could only guess that the principal had come to the back door to investigate something. However, why did he not discover anything? He subconsciously looked out of the window. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.